This story begins with a little girl being brought breakfast by a maid. The little girl said that any food tasted better when shared with someone, but the woman objected that she needed to eat and grow, and the food brought was not enough for two. Whereupon the nanny said that she would be back soon as she had cleaned and washed all the dishes. Tiny replied that she would look forward to her return. When the woman left, the little girl looked at herself in the mirror and noted that she was wearing a dress that was not fit for a princess. She was already 6 years old, but since she was too small in stature, she looked 5 years old at most. Our heroine reincarnated and found herself in a work of fantasy genre, which she had reread more than once in her past life. The Duke of Carden, Fel Bardian, had been trained to be loyal to his dynasty, but he had not been shown what love was. The great Saint Reyna had incredible magical abilities and possessed a kind heart, but she was a commoner. It seemed as if fate itself had brought them together. Together they were able to overcome all obstacles and overcome hardships. In the end, they played a wedding. Everyone thought that a long and beautiful life full of love was ahead of them, but it didn't turn out that way. Unfortunately, the reality turned out to be harsh. After giving birth, the girl could not recover her strength for a long time and finally died. Carden was out of his mind with grief. The man was unable to cope with such a loss, so he decided to forget about the existence of his daughter. Our heroine believes that this is child abuse. Tiny noticed that the maids were coming and decided to hide from them. She heard only a scrap of phrase that everyone calls her a nameless princess. Then they started discussing that she was no princess at all. Doesn't anyone treat her like one? She was just a little parasite and wasted food. The girls didn't understand why her nanny was always running around with her, telling her she was beautiful and protecting her in every possible way. Except for her, this little girl is absolutely no one needs her. Our heroine was very unpleasant to listen to all this, so she decided to run away as soon as possible. After a while, the nanny read the girl a fairy tale and said that eventually the wish of the main heroine came true. From then on, she was always happy, after which she said goodnight to the princess. Looking out the window at the full moon, the babe asked if she could fulfill the wish. The woman replied that, of course, let her just say what she wanted. The little girl clung tighter to the maid and asked her to hug her tighter. She remembered how her mother had abandoned her and put her in an orphanage in a past life. The girl realized that her wish would never come true. But still she asked the moon to give her a real family. Our heroine promises that she will behave well. The next day, the little girl saw that there was some turmoil in the palace. The maids were running back and forth and shouting that everything should just sparkle. Their supervisor was yelling for them to work faster. The Duke should be arriving any minute now, so everything had to be just perfect. While the babe was wondering why Carden had decided to return to the mansion, she noticed that the older maid was staring at her and didn't look away. The woman then walked over to her and said that she was no princess in any way. Therefore, let her go to her room. They are all busy working, by the way, and the little girl is only messing around. The girl was angry at the words of this nasty woman. No matter how she said it, she's still a princess. The maid has no right to treat her like that. Hiding in the bushes, our heroine thought that did they really think that she would obey them? She's already 6 years old, and she has never seen her father. She owed it to herself to see him, whatever it cost her. When everyone began to greet some man and call him your lordship, the little girl thought she needed to get closer to get a closer look at him. Then the babe ran out of her hiding place, and this act was completely rash, after which she greeted her daddy. Squeamishly pointing his finger at her, the young man asked where the maids were. Why, it dares to talk to him. The little girl was astonished at such treatment and thought that if in this life, too, no one needs her. Our heroine took off her shoe and with all her might threw the arrogant insolent right in his face, then burst into tears and began to quickly run away as she was very offended and unpleasant. After a while, the girl walked around the palace and thought about what would happen to her now. It seemed that she would be punished. Hearing some footsteps, our heroine turned around and saw Carden, who was walking quickly in her direction. Looking at him, the little girl thought that he had decided to personally punish her. Then she exclaimed that he was wicked and let him not come near, for she had another shoe. The young man told her to look at her foot. Tiny saw that there was blood on her foot and immediately began to feel pain. Then the young man simply threw her second shoe and turned to leave in order to go on with his business. Our heroine did not realize what it was and how to understand it. It seems that this was her chance. There is no way she will not give up, because she has been preparing for this day for so long. Even he wouldn't be able to resist her cuteness. The next day, the girl woke up tired as she had been thinking all night and had hardly slept at all. Carden is just an incredible meanie. This is the first time he's come to visit his daughter in 6 years, and he's being so obnoxious. But surely he must have some reason for visiting the palace. Then the babe decided that it was worth it to just forget about what happened yesterday and pretend that today was just another very ordinary morning. The nanny said she would be back closer to lunchtime, so the girl had some free time. She decided to leave her a note for the woman to take it easy and go about her business. Having drawn her a picture, the little girl thought that the maid must surely guess from it where the girl had gone. After a while, she reached her destination and noted that with such short legs she could not run much. In the elder's garden there was a great number of lovely, delicate lilac flowers. It was in this beautiful place that Carden had proposed to his beloved Raina. The little girl couldn't believe that she was actually in this place. Everything was so much more beautiful than she had imagined when she read the book. Then she came to her senses and decided that there was no time to admire, for she had to collect the bouquet. Suddenly the maids were near her and asked her what she was doing in this garden. It seems that they need to better watch the front garden, or all the flowers will paint. Our heroine was angry that actually she is a princess, and they have no right to look down on her. Then one of the girls purposely threw a watering can in her direction, which doused her from head to toe, and snidely apologized, adding that she was so embarrassing. When the other girl stated that she was all wet as a rat, Tiny thought to herself that was too much, so she clawed at her hair. Shouting angrily that the girl had asked for it, the maid swung around to hit her, but Carden suddenly appeared and asked what was even going on. The maids immediately began to bow and greet his lordship. Our heroine thought to herself why he came when she was in such a terrible state. The young man hissed, "How dare they do that? Let them explain themselves immediately. If they have nothing to say, then let them prepare for their death." The little girl noted that he was very angry. The garden that was full of memories of Raina was spoiled. One of the maidens began to say that the princess had grabbed her by the hair. She jumped on her for absolutely no reason, and after all, they just wanted to check out the garden. Our heroine was outraged by this injustice, so she shouted loudly that it was all an insolent lie. These maids lie everything. The babe first did not start and behaved with restraint. The young man asked her to explain what in that case she was doing in that garden. The babe replied that she wanted to pick a bouquet, but she had been doused with water from head to toe. Next, they began to argue with the maid as to who started it first. Each of them was shifting the blame to the other. Then the girl sharply grabbed our heroine's hand, and it hurt so much that she even cried out. Suddenly, the young man pushed the maid away from the girl with the help of his magical abilities so that she flew aside. Tiny noted that this seemed to be the very power of the Duke. The girl fell to the ground and holding her hand said that it seemed her hand was broken. The piece told that only one person, Carden, was fluent in Aurora. No magic or sword could compare to her. Therefore, only he, as a skilled swordsman and mage, could use her. While the guards were calling for help, our heroine noted that she finally saw the Duke in action. Then the young man ordered these maids to be taken away and charged with insulting a representative of a noble family. The little girl asked what would happen to her if she too would be taken away. Then she started to hiccup as her heart felt like it was jumping out of her chest. The young man looked at her and said that this filth should not be in such a beautiful place. Tiny started to get angry again and thought to herself that he was such an adult and couldn't watch his tongue. Come to think of it, Carden was exactly the same in the book. The maids destroyed his garden, and she did the same to his beloved Raina. Meanwhile, the boy repeated his question about what she was forgetting in that garden. The girl replied that it was a secret. After these words, the man silently turned around and began to leave. The little girl thought to herself that he did not even ask if she was not bruised and if everything is all right with her. But suddenly the young man sat down on one knee beside her and handed her a purple flower. The little girl asked in surprise that it was really for her. Carden replied that yes, she had come there for the flowers. Now let her go and have a good wash, because she is all dirty. Our heroine noted to herself that he was worried about her after all. Then she asked him if he liked these flowers. The Duke replied that, of course, let her already go to wash and do not ask stupid questions. After a while, the girl reflected on the fact that after all, he was not what she imagined him to be. She thought he hated her. That's why he left her alone. But it seems he was going off to war. True, she was very small and remembers almost nothing. It must have been after he left that her memories of her past life came back to her. Maybe he hates her. Now they could bond and become a real family. Then the nanny said that the Duke personally handed her medicine to make her recover faster. The girl walked briskly down the corridor and talked about how life was wonderful and was finally getting better. She would now proceed with her plan. The first item was to pick a flower, and she noted that there was no trace of yesterday's mess. She then went in search of Carden, or at least his room where he was resting after a hard day. In one of the rooms, she saw a young man attending to work matters. The maid brought him some tea and informed him that she would leave it on the table. The little girl crouched down near a post and exclaimed loudly that she was tired of walking and needed a little break. Just then her father appeared and asked how she got there. Smiling sweetly, the babe held out a flower to him and said that she had plucked it for her daddy. Taking it in his hands, the young man noted that it was all wrinkled and looked just terrible. Suddenly, the little girl offered him friendship and said that she would bring him flowers every day, after which she laughed, told him goodbye, and started running away. On the way, she wondered if she was in too much of a hurry, but then decided that still without persistence, nothing will work out, and she is sure that Daddy will like it. The next day, our heroine told the nanny that she would be back soon. The woman said that if she was going to see the Duke, she could take her to him, for he was most likely on the Platts. Tiny replied that was fine. They could go together. Every day for a week, the girl went to his office and brought a flower, until Carden said that it was no longer necessary to do this. Our heroine asked frustratedly that he didn't like it. The young man replied that yes, because it is absolutely useless. Since then, the little girl stopped coming to him, but so simply gave up was not going to give up. Therefore, at the sight of the Duke on the plateau, the little girl shouted, "Daddy, hello," and ran in his direction. Those present immediately began to whisper whose child it is in general and what is her hair color. When the silence dragged on, the babe reminded him to say hello when he met her, in case he had forgotten. The maid became embarrassed and said that my lady was very anxious to see him. The Duke replied briefly, clearly. Our heroine was extremely indignant because how can you be so insensitive and not even say hello? It is absolutely impolite. The young man exclaimed, in whom she even went so. It's actually dangerous in this place, after which he ordered Erwin to continue practicing. The girl immediately noted that he was the best of the Bardian knights and also Carden's right-hand man. The young man said that they needed to go to the study, so the babe took him by the sleeve and they went there together. After a while, there was a knock at the door and a woman's voice was heard apologizing to his lordship for disturbing him. But the girl brought tea and various cakes as he had requested some time ago. Tiny noted that they looked very appetizing. Taking one of the plates, the young man walked over to the girl and told her to eat whatever she wanted. They were so beautiful to look at and obviously delicious that the girl just started chowing down on them. The Duke pointed out that people might think he was starving her. At least let her chew once in a while. Having finished eating the treats, our heroine asked what her name was. From surprise, the young man dropped a cup of hot tea on his lap. The little girl explained that absolutely everyone calls her just a princess, but even flowers have a name. But does she have one? The Duke replied that she did. Her name is Emilette Bardion. It means radiant with love. Our heroine exclaimed that it was very beautiful. Then she asked if he had invented it. But the Duke replied that he had not. It was the name given to her by the one he loved more than life. Then Carden added that they had invented it long before their daughter was born. But a lot of things happened afterward, so the fact that no one knows it is all his fault. Little almost forgot that now Carden is not the main character of the book. This isn't a work of fiction, it's reality. Everything here is real, and so is the Duke. He is an ordinary man who has had his share of suffering. Therefore, she exclaimed that she really liked her name and thanked him for what he told her, after which our heroine laid her head on his lap and apologized for everything. The girl ran joyfully around the palace and said that she was Emily, whose name shone with love. But suddenly a girl appeared behind her back and said that while she was here having fun, the garden maids were rotting in the dungeon. Thinking a little, Emily asked what she should care about that. She said she didn't feel sorry for them in the least because they were there because of her. Then she called her selfish, grabbed her by the arm, and started dragging her somewhere. But suddenly Erwin Pasto appeared behind them and asked what was wrong. The girl immediately lied that nothing. She was just correcting the princess's cuff. In the piece, Erwin was loyal to Carden, and they overcame all troubles together. Even when the Duke was in danger because of the devious plans of the Emperor's cronies, he personally dealt with everything. Such trust was earned by his sharp mind and swordsmanship. Aristocrats scornfully called him Carden's dog, but our heroine did not doubt him one bit, so she trusted him. The little girl greeted him affably and called him by name. The young man was surprised that she remembered him and said that she had grown a lot since their previous meeting. Tiny asked in surprise that had they really met before that. The young man replied that when the Duke was at war, the lad had visited her several times and reported everything to Carden. Today, however, he decided to make sure she was in good health. After a while, Emilet entered her father's study and reported that she had brought him a gift. Looking at the bouquet, the Duke said that he had asked her not to bring him flowers. Tiny exclaimed, "Why? Because they are so beautiful. Now she also knows how to make bouquets." Then the girl asked if he was busy. The young man asked what she even cared. The little girl replied that she couldn't even be bothered to ask. When the young man replied that he wasn't busy, Tiny declared that that was wonderful. "Then we can have lunch together." After a while, Emily was mesmerized by the abundance of delicacies, but then she came to her senses and thought about not letting the delicious food stupefy her. Looking around, our heroine saw the very girl who was hitting on her in the hallway and a couple of other people who were constantly mocking her. Then she mentally apologized to Carden that they wouldn't be able to have lunch together. Out loud, she realized that it was the same sister who had dragged her to the dungeon, and that uncle gave her a rotten cake, and that auntie didn't give her wood in the winter when she was very cold and sick all the time. It was also the first time she had seen such a fine meal, so she was eager to taste it. The young man immediately started demanding an explanation from the butler and asked what he had been doing for 2 years during his absence while he was supposed to be watching over the mansion. Stammering, the lad replied that he had been watching. Carden then asked Emily if her birthday had ever been celebrated during the winter. The little girl replied that she hadn't. Then he asked her about her closet, whether she liked her new dresses. Our heroine did not understand what dresses we are talking about. The young man exclaimed menacingly that he had heard more than enough. Hearing the shouts, Erwin burst into the room. At the sight of the young man, His Majesty said that he was just in time and have him bring the nanny to him immediately. Tiny immediately grabbed him by the pant leg and started screaming that that woman was her family. It wasn't her fault in the slightest, and the only one who had always loved her. Duke replied that he shouldn't be so worried, he just wanted to ask her a couple questions. As soon as the woman entered the room, our heroine immediately rushed into her arms. Carden told her that he only wanted to hear the truth right now. He then asked her how she and Emilet were doing while he was away. It was hard to fit everything into one story. Erwin would periodically come and report to the Duke on what was going on in the mansion. In those moments, all was well, and they had enough of everything. But Carden traveled even farther north, and the servants decided that he had simply abandoned his daughter. They stole absolutely all the money and forbade the nanny from contacting anyone. These people made their lives a living hell. The woman did not have the opportunity to report all this to him. Everything he heard made the Duke completely furious, and he told his daughter, along with the nanny, to go back to the room. After a while, the little girl sat near the window and thought about the fact that Carden looked very lonely. Our heroine was approached by the nanny and asked if she wanted to go for a walk in the garden. The babe was surprised that she suggested it so late, for it was already dark, but agreed. The maid led the little girl to the very garden where she saw Carden standing there thinking about something. The boy said that when he first saw her, he had been frightened. He was worried that they would get close and the girl would disappear, just like her mother. Guy was very afraid that she would be unhappy with him. Emilet exclaimed that this was not the case at all. Doesn't her father want to see her, talk to her, give her gifts, and make her happy? Next to him, the little girl is always smiling, and she would love for him to do that too, at least sometimes. Duke apologized for not understanding exactly how she felt. Everything would be okay now. That very night, our heroine was able to pull him out of the quagmire of fears and doubts. After that, she became a full-fledged princess. All those responsible were punished. More than half of the servants, including the butler, were replaced by those who worked back in Raina's time. Also, the girl was now able to spend more time with her father. When the babe ran up to him and asked him what he was doing, the boy replied that it didn't matter at all, as she wouldn't understand anything anyway. Emilet noted to herself that the sour mien had reappeared. Then the boy said that it was necessary to hire a teacher to teach her etiquette and everything else she needed to know, but it was absolutely no rush. The little girl liked the idea and exclaimed that she wanted to learn right away. She would be very diligent. After a while, she was immediately matched with a teacher whose name was Deska. The man said hello to her and offered to start the class. The teacher said that he had heard that she was interested in history. He then asked her if she knew when the Dandalakis Empire was founded. Emilet replied that it was about 800 years ago. The man replied that this was absolutely correct, and today he would tell her the story of the guardian god of the empire. but before that, she must hear about the first emperor. His Majesty Dandalicus Hijack was able to rebuild a ruined country by uniting two small villages. It was then that he met Master Fade, who would become the guardian god. Fade, who had incredible magical talent, helped Hijack create the country, but the wizard touched a forbidden sacred relic, after which he was cursed and lived miserably for the rest of his life, but he always protected others. The little girl remembered that he had received eternal life, but this could not be considered a god gift, only the truest curse. It was all just a legend, but assuming it was true, this mage might still be alive. To exist for so many centuries alone is just incredibly difficult. One can't even imagine how he copes with it. The teacher asked if she had ever been to the Imperial Library. There are so many interesting and valuable books there. Let her definitely go there as soon as she has time. Nobles and scholars can get a pass and get acquainted with rare books from all over the world. Just make sure he doesn't get lost, as he might stay there forever. During dinner, Carden asked her why she needed the library, but then added that he had to go to the palace. The little girl began to urge him to take her with him and promised him that she would be very well behaved. The father replied that he would think about it. When the nanny collected our heroine on the road, she noted that she was very happy since she could not even sit still. After a while, she appeared in front of her father and reported that she was ready. This was her first outing. The young man noted that his daughter was just glowing with happiness. The little girl sharply covered her face with her hands and exclaimed that her father looked just dazzling today. The Duke picked her up in his arms and said that the sun would soon set, so it was necessary to hurry in order for her to get to the library. All the way in the carriage, the girl did not take her eyes off the window, because there was so much to see and see. She asked her father to take her somewhere. The young man replied that he would consider it if she would be well behaved. Upon reaching the very imperial library, Emilet was amazed at how huge it was. Her father informed his daughter that he had business at the palace and would be back in a couple hours. Let her obey her nanny in everything. The little girl replied that of course she would, for she was a well-bred girl. Then she wished him a good journey. Being already inside, our heroine noted that there were books about everything. She noticed that her nanny was interested in publications about the education of children, so she said that she would go on and read and let the woman wait. Walking through the huge room, the girl noted that the books smelled very pleasant, just like in the school from her past life. Books about magic caught her attention, and she wondered if she could do magic just like Carden. She found a publication called Magic for Beginners and decided to start there. But then some boy caught her eye, and she thought he was asleep. When the girl got closer to him, he asked who she was. Emily immediately apologized and said she didn't mean to wake him up. The boy smiled and replied that it was no big deal because he had already gotten some sleep anyway. Our heroine said that he was so beautiful, like an angel. The boy replied that it was more like an angel in front of him. He added that he hadn't seen children in this library in a long time. Emily asked if he wasn't a child himself. The boy looked at his hand in confusion and said that he was indeed, but that it didn't matter at all. The babe introduced herself to him and asked what his name was. The young man replied that she could call him Faye. Our heroine suggested that he become friends. The boy asked if she really needed something from him. The little girl didn't understand what he was talking about and said that actually friends just communicate with each other and have fun. Then our heroine heard the babysitter calling her and said that I think it was time for her to go. The boy said he agreed to be her friend. He is always in this library so they can see each other next time. The little girl said she would definitely stop by again. After that, she said goodbye and said, "See you later." When the girl ran up to the nanny, the woman said that she was almost heartbroken when she couldn't find her. It was time for them to go, for it was better not to keep the Duke waiting. On the way, the little girl was glad that she had managed to bring a couple of interesting books with her. Taking out a magic ball, Nanny said to wait a moment so she could check to see if Carden had contacted them. It's sort of analogous to a telephone from our heroine's past life. It takes powerful magic to reach someone. Her father uses it without a problem. Then the little girl noticed that people around began to whisper and discuss who this girl was, if she was the daughter of the dead saint. Suddenly a carriage appeared from which Carden came out and asked Emily if she had had a good time and if she had done anything wrong. To the great surprise of those present, the little girl screamed, "Daddy," and ran towards the young man. The young man noted that she even took a book of some kind. The girl exclaimed that yes, because there are a lot of interesting things there. This edition has a very beautiful cover. The Duke noticed that people around whispered and thought that they flew like flies. On the way in the carriage, our heroine told Papa to call her Amy. That would be her nickname. Then she added that she wanted to study magic. The very next day, she was sent Tedo, who was an advanced level mage. He would be in charge of her training from that day onwards. Behind her back stood Carden, looking menacing, and the babe asked if he had any other business to attend to. The young man told her to ignore him and just listen to the teacher. Tedo said that first they needed to find out if the babe had magical abilities. He then took out some kind of box and said that it was a device to determine the presence of mana in the body. With this cube, they will find out if she has enough mana to use magic. The device will change color according to the magical power the person has available. Advanced level magicians usually fill up about half of the cube, while for beginners, it will color a bit from the bottom. The girl said she wondered how much her daddy would have. She then asked to touch the cube, but the young man refused. The teacher said that if His Majesty touches the device, they will no longer be able to measure her strength. The device wouldn't be able to withstand it. It could only be measured in a magic tower. Carden explained that as soon as he touched it, it would shatter. Such a trinket could measure his strength in it. The little girl grabbed the cube and said she wanted to try it too. Maybe from her strength, the device would break too. But unfortunately, absolutely nothing happened. Tedo told the princess not to get upset. Apparently, she has a divine power that the cube won't show. Everyone has magical or divine powers at birth. A person with a lot of mana becomes a mage, and a person with powerful divine power becomes a priest. Both priest and mage are equally powerful, so there is no discrimination. Divine power and magic are inherently incompatible. There is a ceremony once a year for children who are 10 years old to receive a special mark. It is needed for emergencies, as a magician can heal people with magical power, and priests can heal people with divine power. Our heroine thought to herself that it all reminded her of the blood type difference. The teacher said that if she doesn't have magical power, she has divine power. They couldn't exist at the same time. Reina was a great saint after all. The girl thought to herself that apparently the older she got, the more she resembled her, because they looked so much alike. The little girl did not understand how she could measure her strength in such a case. Her father replied that it was not necessary and let her just look at the device. To Emilet's great surprise, she saw in it a mixture of several colors, black and lilac. Our heroine noted that even the young man was very surprised at what he saw. When the girl asked if there was something wrong with her, the teacher exclaimed that not at all, it's just that you have to figure everything out first. Her strength was many times greater than that of a top-level mage. However, he had never seen mana of different colors in his life. Everyone has a different color, and no two people have the same color. Looking at her hands, the babe didn't understand what she should do now, because she wanted to wield magic so badly, but she didn't know it would turn out like this. Tedo said not to worry. He'll go back to the magic tower and tackle the books. The boy would find and read all the works on the subject in order to find the answer he needed. When the mentor left, his father picked Emily up in his arms and said that she and he looked a lot alike, especially with their eyes. The little girl asked what, didn't he like that, but the young man replied that he liked it and even very much. Let him not worry about all sorts of little things. The young man thinks that very soon they will get an answer from the magic tower. This is also the first time he's seen magic in different colors. Naturally, if anything, he will go with her. Our heroine was surprised that her father comforted her. Then they decided that it was time for lunch and went to eat together. Carden turned out to be right, and by the end of the next day, a letter had already arrived. The tower keeper invited the little girl to measure her magic power. At the sight of the imperial palace, the girl was struck by its beauty and the fact that it really turned out to be golden in color. Hijack, who was the first emperor, and Fade, who was the first caretaker, worked the hardest to build the imperial palace and the magic tower. The previous Blue Castle was destroyed to signify the beginning of a new era. In its place, a palace of gleaming gold was erected, and Fade built a black tower nearby that seemed to absorb the dazzling light. Emily wondered how close they were, placing the palace and the tower so close together. Yet the magical structure was somehow lonely, seemingly detached. Already inside, the young man had told her not to touch anything, or she might be stuck there forever. This room didn't have her favorite cookies, so she shouldn't climb anywhere. When the little girl cringed and said it was very scary in there, the young man replied that she had a rather silly look on her face just then. Our heroine replied that she was just repeating after him. Did it not turn out like that? The guy said that it didn't. The local mages were not expecting to meet Duke Carden himself. They never thought they would be able to see him with their own eyes. They were very curious about what kind of girl was sitting on his shoulders. When Tedo ran up to them, the young man said that there was a lot of noise around and he could silence everyone. Stammering, the mentor apologized and told them to follow him. When they reached one of the rooms, they saw some man who said that she looked like the spitting image of Dukes as a child. Her father bowed to him and greeted his teacher. Tiny thought to herself why Cardin's teacher was so young. Maybe powerful magic can slow down the aging process. The teacher said that he had expensive guests and he behaved inappropriately because he didn't even offer them a seat. Then he apologized for the mess around him. Then he snapped his fingers and the books began to return to their places. After that, the man took out some ball, which resembled something like the cube her teacher had given her, and asked her what color she saw. The little girl replied that there was none. The tutor replied that, right, if the Duke or Tedo took it, nothing would happen, so let her try to hold it. Thinking that if it was dangerous, her father would stop her, the babe took it in her hands. The orb turned several colors, and the teacher concluded that the princess had several powers at once. It was hard to believe, but it was indeed true. Father explained that the orb does not measure magical power, but divine power. It is used in the church. That's why it doesn't react to magicians. The teacher said he had studied the ancient treatises and decided it was worth bringing the orb with him. But I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. As for what effect it would have on the girl, he has no idea, since this is the first time he's seen someone like this. But if someone were to find out about it, nothing good would come of it. The very first to want her would be the imperial family. No one in the world can have two powers at the same time. It's a law of nature. If this becomes known, even other countries will want to subjugate the little girl. Right now, only 4 people know about it. They can try to keep it a secret, but only temporarily. When she turns 10, a ceremony will be held and everything will come out. On this day, absolutely all children receive their tags. The child with the highest status becomes the representative, and the babe is just the daughter of Duke Baratheon himself. It is then that all attention will be drawn only to her, and the world will learn about the real power. This news will spread with the speed of light across the continent. The men then asked the little girl again to take the ball in her hands to test something. Cardin didn't understand why they had to repeat all these manipulations again. Tedo told him to look closely at the crystal. Emilet exclaimed that it was as if the black color surrounded the violet color. The teacher replied that that's exactly what it is, purple dots floating in black gas. The black gas is magical power, and the purple circles are divine power. Then added that they would start by training her magic power to begin with until she fully mastered it. The little girl wondered if she would be able to use the 2 powers, whether it would even be a problem for a child's body. Then her father's teacher said he wanted to check one more thing, after which he told Thedo to show Lady Bardyon her lab. The man was sure she would like it very much. The little girl didn't like that an excuse was made for her to leave, and they talked without her presence. Out of the corner of her ear, she heard that they were going to talk about rain. Bringing the babe to her workstation, the mentor told her not to touch any jars of liquids. The young man then handed her a pendant and told her that he had made it himself a long time ago. Then he told her to turn the stone in the center, and beautiful blue butterflies began to emerge from the jewelry. Emily asked in surprise if they were real, but the guy explained that they weren't really. He had sealed some magic into the necklace, and soon they would disappear. Another spell can be placed in it as well. Only to begin with it is necessary to train herself, and then she can already do whatever she wants with it. Our heroine asked in surprise that he was giving her this pendant. The young man replied that he was, because it was worth almost nothing anyway. It also has a protection spell sealed in it, but it can only be used once. Maybe she would need it someday. The little girl was very pleased, and she thanked the young man for such a wonderful gift. Then the teacher exclaimed that he wanted to show her something else and ran away. The girl began to hear some voice that resented him for not being given a day's rest and what he needed at all from him this time. Emily didn't realize where it was coming from. The voice continued to resent him and question why this minnow had come here in the first place, though she still couldn't hear his question. But our heroine replied that she could hear it, after which she asked who he was. The voice said to look to the left, and when the babe turned around, she saw a small yellow flower. Tedo noticed that this plant interested our heroine and said that this flower grows only in the northern part of their country. Its peculiarity is a strange swaying from side to side. The little girl asked if it could talk. The young man replied that it was unlikely. People try to grow them only because of their beauty. The difficulty is that they grow mostly in the north. Our heroine noted to herself that this is where Carden periodically goes to suppress monsters. It seems that soon he must go there again, and she really wanted to be alone. The northern monsters live in groups and are called volumas. At intervals of a few years, their numbers increase greatly. Because of this, it is necessary to constantly organize raids to clear them. Their main advantage, hard as steel skin. And recently there have been discovered creatures that have learned to use tools. Against them, you cannot relax for a second, and only the strongest mages and priests can participate in this battle. When the flower sharply shouted that no, he is not cute and there is nothing to say about him, all sorts of nonsense, he is very annoyed. Our heroine jumped from surprise and fright. The young man immediately asked what happened to her and whether everything was all right. After these words, Emily realized that the flower heard only her. The plant also finally realized why, when he tried to talk to someone, everyone ignored him. The teacher asked if she liked Murkit. If so, then let her take him in and take care of him. The little girl didn't need it at all, but the plant started begging her to take him and talking about how he didn't even need to be fed and would be very loyal to her. Tedo said that it was not difficult to take care of him, and if it was hard for her, he could help her carry him. But the girl replied that it was all right. The young man was glad that she liked him and said that if you start clapping your hands in front of him, the flower will dance for joy. Let him try it someday. There was a voice from the flower that called him inconsiderate and that it would never forget or forgive him for this humiliation. Then the magician added that Murkit's bud looked as if it should bloom soon, but in fact no one had ever seen it bloom. Our heroine asked why. The teacher replied that he didn't know. He himself had personally tried several methods, but nothing worked. Tiny himself can try. They say that if it blooms, then even a dream can come true. Carden entered the lab along with her mentor, who apologized for their delay. The girl immediately ran to her father and said that she missed him, even though she was having a lot of fun in this place. When the Duke saw the flower in his daughter's hands, he got angry why the teacher was doing something he wasn't asked for and giving his daughter some incomprehensible gifts. Tedo immediately hid behind the master's back. The man informed him that the princess has magical power that surpasses even advanced mages, but it requires a lot of study and practice to use it. He would like to offer her training in the magic tower. She is a beginner, so she might attract a lot of attention, but still, the tower would be safest. The young man told her that if she accepts, she will meet a lot of difficulties. I will have to force myself through. But the little girl replied that it was all right, for she wanted to learn magic in order to protect her daddy. From early in the morning, the flower began to cry out that it needed water. He knew that the princess hears him perfectly well, so there is no need to pretend to be asleep. Yawning, our heroine went up to him and said that because of him she does not sleep every day. The nanny asked with emotion in her voice that the princess is really talking to this flower again. That's very sweet. The little girl thought to herself as if she had any other choice. The woman wouldn't laugh so hard if she could hear it. After a few days of talking to this plant, she had learned many things. For example, that Murkit were not just flowers, but nature fairies who were trapped inside the buds by an inexplicably strange force. Bud cried and begged to get her out of there, and she would do anything for that. Our heroine tried to calm him down and said that she would try to deal with this curse somehow. The woman said it was time to get dressed. After that, she led the girl to the dresses and asked her what outfit she wanted to wear today. The girl remembered her father carelessly handing her a dress as if he was doing her a favor and saying that he bought it completely by accident. Even so, it was still very nice to receive gifts from him. Things had changed dramatically since the day she'd found common ground with Carden. None of the old servants remained, and she was no longer ignored. Stale bread and rotten soups were a thing of the past, but it was her relationship with Papa that changed the most. When the babe ran into his office, the young man told her that a letter had arrived from the magic tower. Her training will begin in exactly 2 days. The girl replied that, fine, and looking at the huge number of other letters that were lying on the table, asked, and the rest of all the letters to whom? The young man replied that they were also to her. The girl was very surprised that it was all to her and began gradually to read each one. All the letters praised her and basically said pretty much the same thing. In general, it said that she was still very young, but so talented that she was already studying in a magic tower. They would very much like to talk to her and hope that the princess would accept her invitation. The girl didn't understand what they could talk to her about since she was only 6 years old. Her father said that if she really wanted to, she could go. Our heroine thought to herself that she may be small, but she is not so simple. So she said out loud that no, she was absolutely not interested. Her father immediately began to destroy all these letters and said that it was absolutely unnecessary to answer them. The little girl noted that he was just like a real supervillain, and if she were really 6 years old, she would definitely cry. Then she exclaimed that she had forgotten that she had a present for him. After that, she held out a small package to the boy. While getting acquainted with the servants, our heroine discovered a new hobby, baking. She did not even think that it would be so much fun. So, as soon as she had a free moment, she would run to the kitchen and start cooking. When the baker told her that it looked like the cookies were ready, she said no, because until they were brown, it was too early to take them out. Therefore, it was necessary to wait a little longer. Looking at the smoking oven, the man replied that let it be as she said. The little girl, of course, did not come out as neatly as the baker's uncle, but still she tried very hard and chose the best for her father. The girl said it was a little burnt, but it was still delicious. They, together with the chef, had already tasted it. She didn't want to share it with him, of course, but he looked so greedy that she just had to do it. The guy replied that it's okay because sharing is a must. A few days later, the babe arrived at the magic tower and greeted the teacher Teto, saying that today her father was very busy, so she was brought by Erwin, who said he would wait in the hallway until her classes were over. Normally, all the students lived in the tower, but since she was only 6 years old and from an aristocratic family, she was allowed to attend classes twice a week. Obviously, Carton had taken care of that. The young man noted that she had brought Murkett with her, and apparently she liked him very much. The girl replied that she did, but thought to herself that he was begging her so much that he never closed his mouth for a second. The mentor said that in this class they would be learning the basics of controlling the flow of mana. This doll he had made from a tree that was very sensitive to magic. He felt it was best to start by practicing on something concrete and tangible. The mage had put a lot of effort into it. The little girl marveled that he had made her with his own hands. The teacher replied that there was nothing special about her, and it was all nothing. Flower said that he must have tried so hard to finish it quickly that he had completely forgotten to eat. Emily wondered if that was the case, so she asked that question out loud to Teto. The young man asked in surprise how she knew that. Tiny pointed to the flower and said that Murkett had told her about it. The wizard decided that it was just a child's fantasy, so naively decided to play along and said that the flower was very clever. Our heroine thought to herself that this is quite an expected reaction. Nothing surprising about a child communicating with a flower. Then the teacher said that it was time to get to class and now he would demonstrate something to her. After that, he raised his hand up and the doll got down on one knee in the same instant. The little girl marveled that it began to move. Teto had told her that all she needed to do was to direct the flow of magic into the object she wanted to move. With a little practice, she would be able to control it freely. The mentor then said that now it was her turn. Let her concentrate on the doll and transfer her energy to it. First, she should close her eyes and visualize a long thread coming from her body and wrapping around the doll. After all these manipulations, the puppet flew upwards at a tremendous speed and got stuck in the ceiling. Teto said admiringly that it contained a large amount of magical power, and it was simply amazing. The little girl started to apologize and said that she did not do it at all on purpose. The young man told her not to worry because in order to master magic, you need a lot of time and practice. There's no way without it. She can take this doll home and practice there. When our heroine went out into the corridor, Erwin asked how her lesson went. She thought to herself that she had made a few holes in the ceiling during her first lesson, but she said aloud that it had gone well. When the attendant said that she could go home, Emilet said that she would still like to go to the library. The little girl immediately dragged Erwin after her, and the young man asked her not to run so fast. On the way, the babe pondered that it was very interesting whether the boy still slept by the window today or not. She was very glad that they would finally be able to see each other. When they came to the very place where he sat last time, the friend of our heroine was not there. The boy asked who the girl was looking for here. Emily explained that the last time she came here, she made friends with a boy. He said he always sits here, but apparently not today. The young man asked to wait for 1 minute and went somewhere quickly. In the meantime, the babe began to examine the books that Faye was reading. They were the correlation theory of the interaction of light and matter, the influence of magical power on the climate and living beings, as well as the origins of power. Amy noted to herself that these buildings were quite complex. Then Irwin appeared, bringing a quill and a piece of paper. Since her friend hadn't come, she could leave him a note, and when he returned, he would realize that she had been looking for him. Our heroine thought it was a great idea and wrote that every time she had a class in the tower, she would stop by the library. The next day, Emmett was practicing her magical abilities on a doll. Flower laughed off her and asked her what kind of dance it was. Even he could do so much better. The girl mentally asked him to shut his mouth. Carden said that if this can be called talent, she is a true genius, already practicing for 3 days and absolutely no progress. Tiny exclaimed that actually, for her age, that was a great result. Does he have even the slightest idea how tired she is? The young man replied that he was actually thinking about learning to dance like that himself. The little girl exclaimed that she had enough of being bullied and let him try it himself. When the Duke decided to try to do the same as his daughter, it came out that the doll came close to her and hit her on the nose with his hand. The girl exclaimed for her daddy to stop fooling around, but the young man said that he was really just hard to control. The little girl was very angry at the sarcasm in her father's voice, and she exclaimed that she would definitely become stronger than him and would not give up. She practiced this strange dance for days on end. When she came to the next class, Tedo greeted her and asked if she had practiced at home. Emily replied that she had. She had been trying very hard. The guy said that was great. After the lesson, they would see what she was able to learn. Now let him wait for a second because he needed to bring some tools. While the teacher went about his business, the girl had a lot of thoughts in her head. Did Faye read the note? Whether she would be able to meet him after class. It was necessary to bake him cookies. What if something happened to him and he didn't get the note? As soon as she was free, she would go to see if it was there. Then the babe thought about the fact that the mentor had been gone for too long and needed to go see where he had gone. Looking around the corner, she noted that he seemed to have gone somewhere that way. After a while, she found the young man, and from his appearance, it was obvious that he was very ill. At first, the little girl thought he was dead, but then she realized that he was just sound asleep. This was not surprising, since the guy is always very tired. Suddenly, the girl heard a familiar voice behind her back, which said that they had not seen her for a long time. He had gotten her note. Amy exclaimed that he was just in time and she missed him very much. But how did the boy get here? The tower is guarded after all, and Irwin is standing at the door. When Faye said that he hoped that the teacher would not wake up soon, our heroine asked in surprise that Tedo had fallen asleep with his help. He's just a genius. The new friend leaned over to our heroine and asked if she had ever been to Vincent Square. Emily replied that she hadn't, but Teacher Deska had talked about it. It is the largest shopping plaza located right in the heart of the capital. Vendors try to stand out by offering a wide variety of goods. Of course, she immediately wanted to visit there after hearing about it. The girl said that she would love to go along, but what would they do with Irwin? The boy grabbed her hand and dragged her along, saying that no one would even notice they were gone. In a moment, they found themselves in a shopping plaza where shouts were coming from all sides, advertising various goods for sale. Our heroine, dumbfounded, asked that whether he could teleport and clothes in general, how did he become different? Then they went to walk around the square and look at everything that is there at all. Noticing a small store, the baby said that it seemed to sell paintings and she wanted to look at them. Running into this room, our heroine noted that all the paintings depicted the same person. The boy explained that it was the Duke of Bardion. More often than not, artists paint someone famous and important to the inhabitants. It is not even necessary to draw life-size figures for this. This was the first time he was seeing something like this with his own eyes. But the girl did not realize who exactly this was because he did not look like Carden. Suddenly, a vendor appeared, who greeted the young guests and noted that they seemed to like the portrait of the supreme mage Fade. Many people can't pass it by. If the boys decide to buy this painting, he will make a good discount for them. The friend told the little girl to pick any painting she wants, and he will buy it for her as a gift. The girl immediately grabbed one of them and was very happy that she would now have such a portrait. Walking down the street, our heroine was engrossed in a conversation with Fairy and accidentally crashed into a passerby. The boy squeamishly exclaimed how she dared to touch his palm. Let her apologize to them now. Our heroine completely insincerely apologized to him as if doing him a favor. The kid got angry and said that she was insolent, after which he began to walk quickly in her direction. From afar, his subordinates ran after him. Emmett didn't understand what was wrong because she had apologized as he had asked. Suddenly, the arrogant boy tripped and fell face down. After that, her friend said they could go on their way. The stranger remained lying on the ground and hissed that he wouldn't get away with it so easily with this little upstart. The boys quickly teleported back to the library and noted that Teto's teacher was still asleep. The girl then asked when he would even wake up, but the boy said he didn't know for sure. He then said goodbye to Emmett and said that he had to go, after which he added that they would definitely see each other again. After a while, the little girl lay in her bed and thought about how incredibly boring it was. Carden was still in the Imperial Palace. It had been a whole 3 days since she had seen Faye. She was once again afraid of being punished. That very day, when Teto woke up, he started apologizing to our heroine and said that he was just tortured by insomnia, but he still had no forgiveness. Amy replied that it was okay, because anything can happen. Then she gave the portrait to her father and he asked what it was. Tiny replied that it was a gift from the Archmage. Our heroine was very curious about when Carden would finally be released. After the hike, a pile of documents had accumulated, plus on top of that the babysitter had gone somewhere else. Then the girl noticed the flower and said that the Duke must have a mountain of books, so we could try to look for something about Murkett. The little girl then grabbed the plant and went to the local library. There she saw a young man who was snoring loudly and sleeping soundly, just like Teto's teacher. The little girl loudly announced that she had to wake up. Everyone is working hard and he's sleeping. What a negligent attitude towards his work. The boy replied that he didn't expect to see the princess there at all. Usually hardly anyone ever goes in there. Let her spare him and pretend she didn't see anything. The girl replied that so be it, but only on the condition that he would help her. She's looking for something about the Murkett plant. The young man replied that was fine and led our heroine somewhere. The girl noted that she had only been to the Imperial Library, but this place was also very beautiful and the books seemed to be no less. We should look into this place more often. So let the young man now always be on guard and keep the lights on. Suddenly, the young man held out some kind of book in her hands. The little girl was shocked that he had actually found it. It was the only book about this flower, and it was called Murkett, the mysterious plant from the north. Tiny exclaimed that she would look for this book herself until she was old. Then she began to flip through it and noted that it described its appearance, its natural environment, and the fact that it had been discovered only half a century ago. After which she thanked the young man for his help. After a while, the girl made sure that not a single word curse was written there. The flower immediately became sad and said that, apparently, nothing could be done about it. But the little girl was not going to give up and thought that maybe there was something else in the Imperial Palace. Let him not be upset in advance. Erwin suddenly appeared and asked if she missed the Duke. Emmett replied that she missed him very much. He worked so hard and they haven't seen each other in days. The guy asked if she wanted him to take her to him. Our heroine was surprised that after all he works in the palace and is very busy, but the young man objected that he was sure that her father would be very happy to see her, so the girl immediately agreed. Walking around the palace, the little girl marveled at how beautiful and golden everything around was. Erwin replied that the current emperor liked such things. Our heroine began to wonder who is now ruling. There were 2 princes and a princess in the piece. All of them claimed the throne, and it was expected that the first prince or the princess would take it, but definitely not the second, who was very stupid. When Emily entered the office where the Duke was supposed to work, she saw many people sitting in a pile of papers and were obviously very busy. The little girl noted that they looked like office zombies, as if she was in a past life. The young men asked Sir Erwin, whom they barely recognized, how things were going on the outside. Suddenly, Carden's menacing voice rang out, asking why they were all frozen if they had too much free time on their hands. The little girl immediately exclaimed that she missed her daddy very much and began to reach out to him. She could see that her father was very busy, so surely she could stay. The young man replied, that of course. Emily looked at the huge mountain of papers and noted that there was still an incredible amount of work, but her father said that there was nothing left and he would be free in a few days. Tiny said that she missed him very much and was lonely without a young man. Suddenly, a red-haired girl entered the office and asked Carden how long it was possible to work tirelessly. As in all such works, Carden and Raina had their fair share of challenges that they overcame in order to be together. 70% of these challenges, it was Nain Morgus who created them. She fell in love with the Duke at first sight, but he didn't even want to hear her banal flirting. This really hurt the pride of the narcissistic girl. At this point, it seemed she had already become an empress. Morgus walked over and asked the young man if he had a moment. She had some tea that was great for relieving fatigue. The only problem was that it was not located here. The boy replied briefly that he would get around to it. He had no time for tea right now. The girl then turned her attention to the girl and asked if this was the young lady everyone was talking about. The little girl was just the same age as her son, and rumor had it that she was a very smart little girl. Carden replied that he didn't think she cared about such gossip. Didn't she have anything better to do? The girl snickered that she hadn't expected him to think so much of her. She really appreciated his concern. Finally, the Empress said that she would like to see the young lady at her palace as soon as possible, after which she left. The young man exclaimed that he was simply fed up with her. That woman was nothing but trouble. Then he told Erwin to keep her away from his daughter. Our heroine thought to herself that it is impossible to talk to the Empress like that. She is, of course, worried about Carden, but still he is very cool. Then the Duke told the workers that they were done for the day, and the boys could be free, but tomorrow they wouldn't go anywhere until they finished everything they needed to do. Those present could not believe their ears and said that they would be in the bathroom for 5 hours. Let all their skin come off. Our heroine said they were very funny. The humble servant replied that you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. In fact, these are the best minds in the empire. After a while, the carriage ride came to an abrupt stop, and the babe asked if they had already arrived, but her father replied that they had not yet. The young man threw his cloak to her and said that he wanted to walk around the square for a while and let her go home if she was tired. But the girl replied that she wasn't, and she really wanted to go along with him. Running out into the street, she walked without looking under her feet and shouted to her father to go after her. But she ran into a boy and fell to the ground. After that, she began to apologize and said that she did not notice him at all. Our heroine paid attention to his golden hair and noted that in this world such people are not often seen. The boy quickly fixed his hood and started to run away without saying a word. Erwin came up to the girl and asked her what had happened, why she had suddenly fallen. The little girl explained that she had accidentally bumped into the boy. Noticing that the young man was thinking about something, Emily asked her daddy if something was wrong, but the boy replied that everything was fine and it didn't matter. The Duke then told his daughter to give him her hand. As soon as she did, the guy remarked that she was as obedient as a dog. The girl was angry that he liked calling his daughter an animal. How dare he even do that? Erwin said that maybe Carden meant that she was cute like a puppy. Tiny exclaimed that she very much doubted that was what he had meant. The young man declared that he saw no difference between a dog and a puppy. Emily looked at him menacingly and said that she would forgive him this time. Let him be happy that he has such a kind daughter. The man replied that he was very glad, and then began dragging her by the arm and telling her to walk down the alley in order to be in the square. He then warned her that she would not be able to get home if she let go of his hand. Upon reaching the shopping plaza, the girl noticed a market flower in one of the shop windows, and it was a different color. Carden went there at once, and the little girl exclaimed where he had dragged her, for she had not asked to buy this plant. At the sight of our heroes, the salesman thought they were some ragamuffins and asked what they wanted. The girl pointed to Merkit and said that it was the one they wanted. The man laughed and said they wouldn't make enough money for it in a year. Let them just get the hell out of here. They'll be in big trouble if a single leaf falls from that flower. Carden was simply furious at everything the man had said. The girl noted to herself that the salesman didn't even seem to realize who they were. After a while, they left the store, and the man shouted after them to forgive him for not recognizing such important guests. The guy told his assistant to fire this salesman immediately. Passing the flower into Erwin's hands, the Duke asked if the little girl wanted to go shopping, but the girl replied that she wanted to go to the square or he would fire all the shopkeepers. It was very beautiful there, and Emilet noted that there were a lot of flowers of different colors around. Her father said that they were decorating the street for the upcoming harvest festival. This day was very memorable for Carden and Rena. It was when they went on a date for the first time, just like a very ordinary couple. Father said that there would be a lot of people there today. If she wouldn't let go of his hand, he would take her to the party with him. After a while, our heroine ran into her room and greeted Merkit. Flower asked caustically how she was having fun there without him. Tiny replied that there was no time for that now and let her see who she had brought. Tiny accidentally stumbled upon this flower at the store and bought it, but unfortunately it wouldn't answer her for some reason. Merk had also tried to shout to her, but there was no response. Emmett decided that it was necessary to get some water. But suddenly the flower screamed loudly and cried. Tiny exclaimed that it could hear them because she was so worried. The plant replied that it did not think she was addressing it. Amy asked who had made him like that, if it was an evil spirit too. Merk had answered that on the way to the northern mountains there was a strange fog, after which everything happened. Our heroine was just making inquiries that Merkit is only found in the northern lands, and the evil spirit is also from the north, just like the Volumas. Judging by the book, The History of the Empire, when these creatures first appeared 300 years ago, the entire continent was plunged into chaos. Only magical and divine powers could affect them, so priests and wizards banded together to destroy them. One day, Carden and Reyna discovered their lair. The source of the origin of these monsters plunged everyone into fear. That place was Moy Mountain. The babe then added that there were some other words written there, but in a language she didn't understand, and it annoyed her that she couldn't read it. It said something like, Peter Sharim. Flowers exclaimed that those words were in their language and they meant, find me. It dawned on the little girl that it was necessary to find the author of this book, but nowhere in it did it say by whom it was written. It is necessary to ask the librarian or the owner of the bookstore. Then our heroine was called to eat, and she picked up the flowers and said that she would take them with her to give them water. After a while, the girl was demonstrating to Teto what she had accomplished with this puppet, for she had practiced a great deal. She wouldn't give up even if everyone laughed at her. The young man noted that she definitely had a talent for magic. But it was a shame that when she showed it to her father, the doll would get stuck in the ceiling. Tiny claimed that the teacher was saying she had too much mana. Daddy replied that this was very strange, as he had a lot more mana, but it never happened. Her mentor suggested that she learn a formula for using magic. It is what Carden uses when she is angry. The little girl really wanted to learn it as soon as possible. After a while, our heroine ran out of the room satisfied, and Erwin asked if her lesson was fun. The girl replied that she had learned something interesting. Therefore, it was necessary to hurry back home in order to practice. When they were already walking down the street, the girl was called by some woman and told that her name was Jenna, and she was the queen's personal servant. The empress would like to have her at her palace. Erwin immediately apologized and said that the lady had another appointment scheduled right now, so it wouldn't work out. The woman replied that she knew perfectly well that the little girl after the magic lesson immediately goes to the duke. Our heroine wondered to herself that she was really following her. Then the queen's aide leaned toward her and said that Lady Bardion had first lied, and now she was being rude to the empress with her refusal. Our heroine replied that all right, she agreed and let her be taken to Morgus. The woman thanked for understanding and said that the queen would be very pleased, after which she ordered her to follow her. Erwin asked if she had thought it over, as there was still a chance to refuse. Emily exclaimed that everything was fine and let him believe in her. Jenna said that even though the palace wasn't far away, she had a carriage ready. The girl noted to herself that she seemed to have decided to mess around, so she wondered what she really wanted. After a while, they arrived at their destination, and the girl was introduced to the queen. The girl exclaimed that today was clearly a special day. She was honored to receive such an incredible guest. After that, she thanked them for coming. Our heroine welcomed her. She thought to herself that she should not look down on Carden's daughter, and they would see who was who. The empress said that she did not know what the girl liked most, so she had prepared a very varied table, and Morgus hoped she would like it all. Emilet thanked her. Laughing, the woman said that she only wanted to have tea with her and chat like her own daughter. The little girl didn't understand why she needed it, if it was just because she was Carden's daughter. Then, eating a bite of dessert, she noted that it was just incredibly delicious. Suddenly, the prince ran up to her and said that he came immediately when he heard her calling for him. He even had to run away from his training. The woman replied that he was just in time. A young lady who is the same age as him stopped by to see her. Let him meet her. This is Lady Emilet, the Duke of Bardion's daughter. It turned out to be the same boy she had encountered in the square. The girl remembered how he had demanded that she apologize to him now. The boy said he was honored to meet her. His name is Nyster Fel Dandelicus. Our heroine replied that it was a pleasure to meet her, and her name was Emily Bardion. The Empress exclaimed that they looked marvelous together. Amy remarked to herself that she must be completely blind, and it seemed she had called her to match her with her son. Neister asked his mother if he could show their flower meadow to this lovely lady. The woman replied that it was just a lovely idea. The girl replied that it sounded good, and she agreed. Erwin immediately got ready to go along with her. The queen stopped him and asked him to give her a moment. The young man apologized and said that he should be by the lady's side at all times. The Empress replied that the glade was perfectly visible from this place. Did he doubt that the imperial palace was safe? Tiny shouted to him that everything was perfectly fine, and then added, in a whisper, that she was still stronger than him. When they moved farther away, the boy stated that she was all silly bratty like that. Our heroine replied that she didn't see any other stupid people here besides him. The boy got angry and started yelling that how dare she speak to him so disrespectfully. Emilet replied that she would talk to him just as he did. If he didn't like something, he could run and complain to his mommy. The boy exclaimed that how could a duke's daughter be like that, whereupon he began to roll up his sleeves and say that she had asked for it. The boy said that she was obliged to fall on her knees before him, and if she didn't, that boy would suffer. Amy thought to herself that it felt as if he wasn't a child at all. The emperor suddenly appeared and exclaimed that the weather was wonderful today, but the beauty of the empress outshone even the sun. The woman disappointedly said that she thought he had a lot of things to do today and would have no free time, but the man replied that the vassals would handle everything themselves. Our heroine introduced herself to him and greeted the emperor. Then she said that let the sun always light his way. His Majesty heard this name and exclaimed that the Duke is also in the palace. The woman replied that no, for she had invited only ladies. The girl pointed out that in the original work the emperor was already old and needed a successor. It wasn't as if the country had an empress, and after her the first prince was in line, so something was wrong here. After the man demanded that more desserts be brought to him, the empress asked him to look at how Neister and Lady Bardion looked beautiful together. They get along marvelously, just like they did with him, so now the children must be together. The girl didn't understand what nonsense they were both talking about and have them let her go home immediately. As if out of nowhere, an angry Cardin appeared. The emperor exclaimed that they had not been warned of his visit. He greeted the emperor angrily and clearly only because that was the way it was supposed to be done. The man naively exclaimed joyfully that it had been a long time since they had seen each other, and after that there was a long pause. The young man immediately took the baby in his arms and said that his daughter must have had a wonderful time at their palace. The emperor replied that she had. Then he began to tell that the lady and Neister were getting along very well. But the young man interrupted him and said that their family had much more important things to do today. The empress must have been unaware of this, so she invited Emilet. The girl thought to herself that it was not possible to talk to the imperial family like that. But her father went on to say that the ladies had a busy schedule and he hoped that they would take this into consideration and not allow such an oversight in the future. Then he said that it was time for them to go and turned around to leave. When they got farther away, her father asked her what she was doing there. He had told her not to talk to strangers. Tiny objected that the emperor and empress were higher in status than them, but the boy said that there should be no objections. The young man told Erwin to handle matters with the imperial family differently from now on. All responsibility he would take on himself. Our heroine asked how he even guessed that she was in the palace. The faithful servant replied that he had informed him about it through a magical transmitter. After a while, the little girl asked her teacher the questions that interested her. The man said that it had been 8 years since His Majesty had ascended the throne, after which she asked if he had told her about the examination which all candidates must pass. The candidate must leave their homeland for a year in order to become rich on their own and glorify the empire. The princess and the second prince went to the south and west respectively, and the first prince went to the north, hiding his origin. Only he returned a year later. The first prince has yet to be found. And the princess who went south to study medicine died of poison. Thanks to her research, they were able to develop a cure for the flu. The empire would be completely different if they could go back. Not holding back his emotions, the man cried, and the girl apologized because she was just curious, after which she handed him a handkerchief. The mentor thanked her and said that she reminded him very much of the first princess. Then he continued his story and said that somehow or other the throne had passed to the second prince. The empire was in poverty and on the edge of the abyss. Every year taxes were raised and the people were getting worse and worse off. The emperor was wasting his wealth. The man would not be exaggerating if he said that, in fact, the empire was now ruled by Duke Bardion. Actually, the disaster in the north should have been handled by the emperor as well, but not by her father. At the moment, both foreign and domestic policies are the duke's responsibility. But 6 years ago, he abandoned his duties. Our heroine noted to herself that just at that time, Reina died and she was born. Without the duke, the entire empire was paralyzed, and the emperor begged him to come back. Everyone was overjoyed at his return, and as a result, the young man gained even more influence. She thought to herself that he was an even greater person than she thought. Then she asked why the teacher was telling her all this. The old man said to himself that he didn't think he would ever tell a 6-year-old child. Out loud, he said that he immediately realized that the little girl was very clever. So he gradually began to complicate the lessons and tasks to a level that is beyond the ability of the average child. The little one is very similar to the last princess. She also surprised him with her talents every time. He believes that if, as a teacher, he had put more effort into teaching her, she wouldn't have died. This probably sounds very silly, but the man really thinks so. So from now on, he will only tell her things that she is really interested in. After the teacher asked if she had any questions, our heroine asked what she was really concerned about. The man noted that she was worried about the Duke's safety. A magical swordsman could only be in danger if faced with tens of thousands of knights. The young man is incredibly strong, and if he wishes, the Dandelicus Empire will become the Bardian Empire. Therefore, for the emperor, the Duke is not only a protector, but also a reason to fear. Then the teacher added that indeed, in the future, the place of ruler must be taken by the right man. Our heroine remarked that Neister did not seem to be the most suitable candidate. The man replied that people vote for the second prince anyway. He has a half-brother who is the first prince. His mother is a young lady from a small family of aristocrats from the outskirts. She was not recognized under the imperial palace and died 3 years later. Perhaps this is the reason why the first prince does not show himself properly. Suddenly, a nanny entered their office and said that it was necessary to hurry because the baby is looking for the Duke. When our heroine ran into the study, she worriedly asked what had happened. The young man introduced her to the very author of the book about merkits, whom she was looking for. The daughter immediately climbed into her father's arms and, pointing to the book, asked the young man if he had definitely written it. The boy replied that if he said he had, he might be right, and if he said it wasn't him, he wouldn't be right. The Duke began to get angry and asked him to speak plainly. The writer immediately fell to his knees and started begging for mercy, saying he didn't mean to do it. Tiny asked in surprise if her daddy had done anything wrong to him. The young man replied that he had no reason to do that. The author started to say that he didn't do it on purpose. He understands that identity switch is a crime, but there is data there that he followed. Carden began to get angry, but our heroine quickly covered his mouth with his hand and asked the writer to tell everything in more detail. The 36-year-old man said that he had a small store of scented candles in the alley of Vincent Square. His candles were unique because they included various medicinal herbs. The store existed for a small circle of regular customers. 4 years ago, he was approached by a teacher who had once imparted knowledge of herbal medicine to him. He asked him to publish a book on merketas under his name. The man thought about it and eventually collected the mentor's materials and published the book, naming himself as the author. This publication generated a lot of revenue for the store, so the publication was useful. Our heroine replied that everything was clear to her and no one was going to punish him. Then she pointed to the inscription in the book and asked him if he knew what it meant. When the boy said it was just a printing error, the kid asked his father if a man could be penalized for publishing a book if he understood absolutely nothing about it. Carden replied that he was certainly liable to pay for the offense. The young man exclaimed that the words were written by a master, so he knew nothing of their meaning. He had compiled this book from what that man had given him. Amulet said that in that case, let him arrange for her to meet his master. The boy replied that they hadn't seen each other in over 2 years. He leads a nomadic lifestyle, but the research materials were left in his store. So if it would help, he would be happy to show them everything. The Duke asked why Tiny was so interested in this plant. Tiny replied that the merkits were cursed fairies, and it was her duty to help them break the curse. After a long pause, Carden turned to Nanny and said that he had no idea how he should respond to all of this. The woman replied that it's important not to clip the wings of a child's imagination. That's the only way creative individuals grow up. The young man thought she was saying the right thing, so he turned to his daughter and said that he believed in her. Let her try to break the evil spell. When Erwin led her to that very store, our heroine asked if it was really the same scented candle that brings happiness. The young man answered that it was, and now he would take her inside. The room was much better than it was outside. It was very clean and beautiful. The boys were immediately met by the salesman who greeted them. He then led them to the second floor and told them that this was the workshop where the teacher worked all the time. He always studied the merkits in this room. The young man didn't know why he was so thorough in his study of the ominous flower. The little girl asked why it was ominous. The lad replied that, in fact, this plant can only be found where there are volumas. Looking at the papers, our heroine noted that the man must have been very serious about studying merks, but, unfortunately, there were some scribbles written on the sheets, and she could not understand anything at all. Her attendant exclaimed that it was the first time he had ever seen such horrible handwriting. He thought it was an imperial language, but it was impossible to understand anything without deciphering it. When they asked the shopkeeper, named Jacques, if he could read it, the young man replied that he had known the master for over 10 years, but still couldn't make out his handwriting. The little boy did not understand how the great book came to be. The kid explained that he used to write normally, and research data is usually difficult to make out. Meanwhile, Erwin's attention was drawn to a map that hung on the wall, and he asked where the salesman had gotten it in the first place. The map that the Empire uses to conquer the North has a bunch of errors on the time of appearance of those creatures, that is 300 years old. And here, the elevation of the terrain is marked, and even the plants are marked. The lad then asked that the one whom Jacques calls his master, who he is in general. The young man explained that his master is like the wind. When he was 15 years old, the man took him in and taught him how to work with healing herbs. In this way, he gave him the opportunity to earn a living. But since he grew up and opened a store, the teacher always appears as suddenly as he disappears. Then he added that sometimes he comes to check on how things are going. Soon the day will come when he will be able to live up to his expectations, for the young man is working hard for his store. He does his own housekeeping and has made a special effort on the exterior. The young man planted plants, so now people are fresh and nature is pleasant. He also hung a pretty bow on the main door. The master was very surprised by this. Emilet said that if he's so worried that not many people come to this place, what about making the decor a little brighter? For example, tidy up the dull vines and plant brightly colored flowers. This way, the store will attract people's attention and visitors will be more. The guy liked this idea and exclaimed that he will now start the changes. Our heroine understood absolutely nothing that was indicated in the research notes, but it was a lot of fun. Plus, she got a gift. It was a candle for body and mind with a very pleasant fragrance. Erwin got the map he was so interested in, and the girl noted that she had never seen him so happy. Already near the palace, the little girl saw Teddo's teacher and asked the attendant what he was doing. The young man replied that he seemed to be preparing the city for the night of the harvest festival. When the spell is activated and launched into the sky, everyone present will see simply incredible beauty. In the entire empire, only the wizard Teddo can create such a large orb. Tiny noted that the harvest festival was just around the corner, but her father was constantly busy. She then pulled Erwin by his cloak and asked if she could go to this festival with her daddy. The young man sat down on one knee in front of her and said that there was a secret. As her knight, he would now tell it to her. The Duke has ordered all officials to finish their work before the festival. For him, this is the first harvest festival in a long time. Erwin didn't think he would ever see the real Duke again, as he had been during Raina's lifetime. At the harvest festivals, they spent time together, walking around the square every day. Hearing all of this, Emily said she wanted her daddy to be happy. The boy replied that it was because of her that the Duke was happy every day. A while later, Erwin was showing Carden the map he had taken from Jacques. He noted that it was currently the most accurate map of the Empire. It contains various features, but it's not only notable for that, it's also very detailed. It depicts the northern lands very accurately. It is necessary to make a copy and study it carefully. Observing all this, the little girl asked if her father was going to catch volume again. The young man clarified why she had suddenly decided to ask that. The babe replied that, in that case, she would not see him again for a long time. The boy replied that he wouldn't be going to the next capture. He would not be there for the squad, but he would replenish their ranks with priests and high-level mages. But in this way, the losses would multiply, and what might have taken 2 years would take 5 years. The girl remembered her teacher's words that one duke acting as thousands of knights was enough to turn Bardian into an empire. Then, Emilet shouted that, in that case, she would go too. She would work hard to master magic and cover her daddy from the rear. She thought to herself that if Carden had to go, then so could she. Then she handed her father a bag and told him that she had bought something for him as a gift. The young man immediately asked Erwin if they were in an alley outside the shipping district. The deputy exclaimed that there was no way. When the babe asked what the shipping district was, it was explained to her that there are so many connected places in the plaza, and each alley has a different atmosphere. Many of them are dangerous. Just by stepping foot in one of them, one could find oneself robbed. Emilet noted to herself that she hadn't even thought of that when she had walked there with Faye, so it would be their big secret. When the man pulled out a candle, the little girl exclaimed that she hadn't picked it out by accident, so don't let her worry. She then said that on the way back she saw Master Teddo in the square. He was setting up a spell, which meant that the harvest festival was coming soon. The young man replied that that was right, and if she behaved well and obeyed, she could probably go too. Our heroine said that her dad must be very busy, so she will go with the knight and her nanny, and right now she's going to ask him if she's going to make it. But the young man stopped her and said he could go along with her. The little girl exclaimed that that was just a great idea. After a while, the woman was doing the girl's hair and asked her if she was enjoying the day so much. The little girl replied that she had been waiting for it for a very long time. After a while, all the preparations were finished, and our heroine asked how she looked. Suddenly, the woman cried, remembering how they lived before and the fact that she could not dress the baby in beautiful dresses, so she rushed to hug the girl, saying that she was just beautiful. Suddenly, a maid came into the bedroom and reported that a child was walking in front of the manor, who said that he was a friend of the princess. When our heroine ran outside, she saw Faye, who was standing near the guards, and they told him that it is not good to lie, so let him tell the truth. The girl immediately ran up to him and asked him how he ended up here. The boy answered that he just missed Amy very much. Tiny noted to herself that he was still so endlessly sweet. But suddenly appeared Carden, who abruptly took the little girl in his arms and said that how dare the boy appear in the Duke's estate without even bothering to introduce himself. Who he was, when, where, and how managed to become his daughter's friend. Emilet said that he really is her friend, not some weird kid. Faye said they met in the Imperial Library, and now he lived in the Magic Tower. The young man was surprised at the information he heard and noted that he had never heard of such young students. The boy said that if he didn't believe him, let him ask his grandfather in the Magic Tower, who was his tutor, about it. After a while, Medjihorse was summoned and asked what happened. He can't believe that the Duke was the first one to summon him to him and decided to talk to him. The young man said that he was concerned with one single question, if he knew a child named Faye. The man replied that he did not. Carden added that the boy came to him and claims to be the Tower Master's apprentice. He has black hair and yellow eyes. Upon hearing this description, the master immediately began to say that he had just forgotten his name for a second. That happens a lot with age. This boy has a talent for magic, so he brought him to the tower. Then he asked Faye what he came to the Duke's manor for. The boy replied that he just wanted to go for a walk with his friend. May his grandfather forgive him for doing this without warning. The girl said that she wanted to go to the harvest festival with her dad today, so is it possible to take Faye with her? She wants them to take a walk together. The master replied that if the princess so wished, of course. After a while, they were already walking through the market square, where from all sides came the shouts of sellers, who were trying to attract customers in order to sell as much goods as possible. The little girl noticed that one of the guys had a drastic change in hair color. After that, she exclaimed whether her father had seen it. The young man explained that it was a temporary coloring. It's only done at harvest festivals. In the old days at the festival, people wanted to distinguish themselves by their appearance, so they wrapped a cloth of their favorite color around their heads. And now the Magic Tower and Temple have made hair coloring possible. It's a traditional imperial entertainment at the harvest festival. If his daughter wants to try it, he can arrange it. But suddenly the boy gave our heroine an amulet and told her to just hold it gently, imagining in her head the color she wanted to dye her hair in. The little girl immediately closed her eyes and began to focus on the color she wanted to see. After a while, our heroine's hair became dark brown, and she asked if this color suited her. She thought to herself that it was a chance to resemble the hair color she had in her past life. The boy exclaimed that now she had hair like his and it looked good on her. The young man countered that actually she had hair like his. Tiny thought to herself that they were both wrong. While the men argued among themselves, the girl ran to the kebab, which smelled very good. The saleswoman noted that the lovely young lady seemed to have come along with her brother and father. They all looked very much alike to each other. Emily asked if she thought they were family just because they all had dark hair. The father replied that if it was just hair, then half the people in this square could be called relatives. The girl wondered to herself why there were so many people with black hair color around. Perhaps it was because of the influence of the first wizard and Carden. When it got dark, the little girl noticed the lanterns and said that they were very beautiful at night. Then she heard a conversation between two girls who were discussing that it was necessary to go to the fountain as soon as possible, for it was not long before it began. It was very interesting to see what was going to happen this year. Our heroes immediately went there, and the Duke asked his daughter to hold his hand tightly because there were a lot of people around and she could get lost. Tiny noticed that there were some colorful glass balls lying near her. She saw that they were falling out of the pocket of the little boy who was being carried by a young man. The little girl wanted to run after him but did not have time because the magic sphere in the fountain began to glow very brightly and it was clearly not normal. The girl shouted to her father that it seemed that the fountain was about to explode, so it was necessary to run away from there as soon as possible. Panic began to set in and everyone started to run away from the fountain, carrying away our heroine, whose hand slipped out of Carden's hands. The little girl screamed, but the crowd carried her farther and farther away, and her father could not get to her. After a while, all dirty and battered, the little one found herself in a place she did not know what it was, for there was no light and no people. She remembered Erwin's words that every street has a different environment. There are many dangerous ones among them, so if one wandered into the wrong place, one could be robbed immediately. The girl decided that it was necessary to get out of there as soon as possible. Hearing the voices that discuss that today they have absolutely no catch, our heroine hid and covered her mouth with her hands so that no one would hear or notice her. The men continued to talk about how the emperor's opponent was unlucky. The ruler still hadn't come to his senses. Suddenly approaching our heroine, they asked what such a babe was doing here. It was necessary to hide better. She should be paid handsomely at the market. When the girl said that they had better not approach her and touch her as they would regret it very much later. The men replied that she did not frighten them at all. They then began to reach out their hands to grab her. Emilet screamed for someone to help her. Tiny concentrated her magical power, just as she had been taught, and exclaimed that she was done laughing because she was getting very annoyed. While the men were distracted and did not realize what was happening, our heroine rushed to run with all her legs. But the spell did not work to the end, and the girl was still caught by the scruff of the neck. When Emilet screamed for him to take his hands off her, it was like some kind of lightning discharge that struck the kidnapper's hand. She realized that it was coming from the pendant that her teacher Tedo had given her. Then our heroine exclaimed that let the others come up if they had had enough of living. One of the men crawled up to her and grabbed her leg, saying that now she was finished. She would pay for making them work. Suddenly some boy in ours appeared and attacked one of the kidnappers. They didn't realize who it was that was able to invade their territory so boldly. After a couple minutes, the stranger, with the help of a stick, disarmed all the attackers of the little girl, after which he exclaimed that she couldn't even stand up for herself, so what had she come to this place for in the first place? When the boy extended his hand to her and said that he would take her back to the square, our heroine noted that he had blonde hair. Then she remembered that not long ago she had run into him in an alley, after which he quickly ran away. She then thanked him for saving her and asked him what his name was. At first, the stranger said it was of absolutely no importance, but then introduced himself as Ard. The babe then said that before he left, she wanted to do something and clarified if the men were definitely out. She then slapped them as revenge for scaring her so badly and exclaimed that things were much better now. Emilet asked what they should do with them since they couldn't drag them, but they couldn't let them escape either. Stating that he had an idea, Ard began to tie them up. Noticing that our heroine was watching him with interest, the boy was impressed that she was not surprised at all and acted completely calm. The girl asked what, did he really think that she would cry silently? She has to hold on, otherwise she's afraid that if she cries, she won't be able to walk. Pointing to one of the alleys, the boy said that if she walked through it, she would see a fountain. Our heroine asked what about it. Ard replied that it would be fine. When she gets to the square, she will be safe, but until then, he will be with her. Emmett asked to talk to her until they reached the place. On the way, the girl asked what he was even doing in the place. The boy replied that he was following her. Then he happened to see that the crowd had pulled her into a dangerous place, so he decided to come to the rescue. In a moment the girl was in the square, Ard immediately said goodbye to her and disappeared somewhere. Our heroine thought about the fact that maybe they will be able to meet again. Near the fountain flew a large number of leaves, and the girl did not understand what it was. Then she caught one of them and decided to read what was written there. It said that the earth lacks the light of the precious sun. The abandoned earth will be seized by disease, and all living things will rot and turn to ashes. Our heroine did not understand who wrote it at all and why. Suddenly there was a voice of the fairy who ran up to the girl and began to hug her tightly, saying that he had finally found her. Then he asked if she was all right and if she was hurt. Tiny replied that she was fine, but suddenly she had some kind of lump in her throat. She always said she was fine. It didn't matter how hungry she was or how angry she was. It didn't matter how sad she was. She always had to be okay. Her life really was miserable. As a frightened Carden ran up to her and held her tightly against him, Emmett noted that she really was okay now that she had a real family. When the young man apologized to her for not being able to protect her, the little girl couldn't help but sob loudly, saying that she was very scared. In that dark alley, she met scary men who wanted to steal her, so the girl thought that she would never see him again. After a while, our heroine lay in her bed and could not sleep at all. Before this, she told the nanny that she could sleep alone. Maybe it's all because she had to go through a lot of things in her childhood, but still now she did not have everything in order. The little girl decided to go to her father's house and saw that there was light coming through the crack in his bedroom door. Stepping inside, she saw a huge portrait of Carden and Raina hanging above the fireplace. Tiny finally saw what the woman who had given her life and given her the name that signified that she lit up the world with love looked like. At the sight of his daughter, a bottle of wine fell out of the young man's hands, and he exclaimed why she had come at such a late hour. The young man then added that if she went to bed late, she would not grow up. Emmett objected that didn't he think she was too big to believe that. The boy replied that yes, because he had scared her like that before, but now it was too late and let her go back to her room. As her father was putting her to bed, the girl asked why he didn't sleep. Was it because of what happened today? Maybe he was scared. The man lay down next to her and asked why he should be afraid. Most likely it was fear that kept her awake. She should be at ease next to him, so let her try to sleep. The next day, Irwin reported that they had investigated and found that the fountain in the square had exploded first, and a few minutes later, explosions went off all over the city. Supposedly, this was the work of those who were displeased with the emperor. At the time of the incident, there were a lot of people on the streets, so this crime could be considered an act of terrorism. The little girl thought about the fact that the bandits were talking about the same thing. The men were discussing that the emperor's opponents were unlucky, but the ruler still hadn't come to his senses. Perhaps if she and Ard followed them together, she could reach the slave market. Aloud, she wondered what had become of those kidnappers now. The knight replied that they had been handed over to the ducal investigative committee. Tiny clarified if they were now in the duchy. The young man replied that no, they were in another palace. The Duke would personally interrogate them, or rather, investigate the matter, and let Amy not fill her head with unnecessary information. Suddenly the boy took her under his arm and offered to have lunch together, after which he asked her how she looked at it. The young man quickly pushed his daughter away from him and told him not to touch her with his hands. The girl didn't realize what kind of competition they were having with each other. But then the man added that if Emily wanted, she could play with him at absolutely any time. That boy had deciphered all the magic formulas in the square. It was thanks to this that they were able to save the little girl. Our heroine asked what the other magic formulas were. Irwin volunteered to explain it to her. The Harvest Festival is usually attended by a large number of people, so all sorts of incidents are not uncommon there. To prevent the use of magic and divine power, magic formulas are activated throughout the area. At a high level, they neutralize powerful magic and divine spells. With them, the disturbances at the festival are noticeably reduced. The set formula exists until the end of the festival, and no one can remove it. Our heroine asked how, in that case, the fairy had managed to do it. The boy replied that there was absolutely nothing difficult about it, although it still took him some time, which is why he found her so late. Amy replied that everything was great, so don't let him get upset since she was already safe. Suddenly there were the voices of the Merkits who exclaimed if she was all right. They were very worried about her and were anxious that she wasn't hurt. The little girl remarked that everything was perfectly fine now and she could go back to her usual life, so she was very happy. Erwin asked if the princess had dyed her hair at the festival. The girl had already forgotten about it, so she exclaimed that it would be the same when she woke up the next day. The young man replied that, as far as he knew, the effect only lasted a day. Suddenly our heroine felt ill, as if something was wrong with her heart. The young people were very frightened for her and tried to shout to her, but she did not respond to them. After a while, Amy opened her eyes and didn't realize how long she had slept. Tiny saw Carton holding Teddo by the scruff of the neck and asking why she still hadn't woken up. The boy replied that he didn't know since he was doing his best. The young man shouted, "That means more needs to be done, so let him heal instead of talking with his tongue." Hearing the weak voice of his daughter, the Duke immediately lost interest in the mage and ran to her. The girl asked what happened to her. She thought to herself that it felt as if something warm was pouring into her heart. The wizard exclaimed that he was glad that she had come to her senses after 2 days of unconsciousness. Considering the flow of magic in her body and the still black color of her hair, it seems after dyeing it at the festival, the mana didn't come out of her body and kept accumulating. Sometimes people are born with little mana consumption, and then higher level carriers store what others can't access. But right now, it doesn't work since the princess has 2 powers. The young man put a plant next to her bed that absorbs magical energy, and he is very happy that it seems to be working. Then the young man, rising to his feet, said that now was not the time to talk. He'd better go get the saplings. Noticing the concerned look on her father's face, our heroine told him that she was fine and not to worry so much. Then the nanny entered the room and told his lordship that a master from the magic tower had arrived at the palace. The lad told his daughter to rest and went to meet him. After a while, the little girl was sound asleep and the nanny was sitting beside her. Everything around was set up with plants that absorbed the magical power. Faye appeared in the window and thought about the fact that he had dealt with the bandits. But then what was going on with Amy, the boy did not understand. Faye noted that he had been told that there was something wrong with the magic flow, but he thought that she possessed 2 powers. Flowers exclaimed that Amy was in a lot of pain, so let him be more careful with her. And anyway, who is this kid, and let him not touch her? The boy asked them to be quiet or they would wake her up. The plants were surprised that he could hear them. The boy kissed our heroine and wished her a speedy recovery because she is his dear friend. The little girl recalled her past life when she had an acute attack of appendicitis and urgently needed an operation. The doctor asked if she had a guardian. The girl replied that she did not. After the surgery, she took the bus home and heated instant porridge. All the time, she was haunted by a feeling as if she had been somewhere else for a long time. When our heroine opened her eyes, she saw Carton in front of her and realized that everything was fine. The little girl exclaimed that she had recovered and now she was fine. She felt so light that she was even ready to run a few laps. The young man immediately brought her some vegetable soup to nourish her and give her strength. The Duke began to spoon-feed her and tell her that she needed to eat a little. Tiny asked if he had made it himself. The man replied that he had not. Our heroine said that it was very tasty, probably because her father fed her. She thought to herself that she liked eating from a spoon, but what happened next was too much. After her body had recovered, she couldn't take a step without Carton. The young man took her to both the imperial palace and the noble assembly chamber. There was nothing for her to do or play with, nothing but invitations to tea. The little girl, of course, understood why he had this behavior, but she was very bored and he was overprotective of her. After a while, her father brought her to a lovely garden, and the girl exclaimed how beautiful it was. Carton said he was very glad she liked Odiana's garden. It is the place where the aristocrats and guests of the emperor walk. The garden is very large, so it's rare to meet anyone there. The girl abruptly sat down beside the flower bed and asked to wait for a while. After that, she turned to her father and put a flower ring on his finger, then immediately asked if he liked the gift. The nanny had taught her how to make flower rings. The little girl noted to herself that it suited him perfectly and looked even more beautiful on him. Then she said that she could also make a bracelet, but it would be a little more difficult than it seemed at first glance. Suddenly the man put a wreath on her head and said that he thought it would suit her very well. Then the little girl noticed that the Crown Prince Neister was also in this garden, and he and his friends were mocking some boy. Our heroine immediately asked her daddy to support her wreath and went to help that boy, shouting at the same time that they should leave him alone and stop immediately. The boys exclaimed who she was and how dare she distract the prince from his game. The girl indignantly asked what kind of game they were playing. The boys mockingly replied that she could go find a replacement for him. Neister stepped closer to her and said that she seemed to be Lady Bardian, so he asks nicely for now that the babe get out of here. Our heroine asked if he wanted to play hide and seek, and if so, so did she. The boy told her to cut the crap. Emmylette snidely asked if he was doubting himself. When the boy shouted that she had asked for it and swung to strike her, the girl used her magical powers to stop him, after which the arrogant prince was thrown back some distance. Tiny thought to herself that she would let him feel the full power of her magic. Out loud, she naively apologized and said that she didn't think he would immediately fall from her childish blow. The boy became completely furious and decided to strike back at her with his own abilities. But our heroine was sharply blocked by Cardan and the boy for whom she had come to intercede. The young man turned to his highness and said that it was a bad game. He wasn't interested in what he was doing or what he was playing at, but this was no way to behave. Neister seemed to be embarrassed and couldn't find anything to say in response. Suddenly the empress ran up and asked what was going on here and why the children were so scared. The young man hissed that he thought the prince had a vision problem, as he couldn't see who he was slinging mud at. Let him get his eyes checked, after which he said goodbye. The girl asked him to wait for a while and walked over to the boy who was being bullied and told him to come with them. Tiny would help him heal his wounds. Already in the palace, our heroine thought about the fact that he must be in a lot of pain. Then she looked at his hair and said that it was very dirty. When she brushed the hair off his face, she didn't even expect to see the Prince of Arda in front of her, but it turned out to be him. Her father asked if this was the same boy who had saved her in the square. Emmylette replied that he was. It turns out that Ard is the first prince. Who would have thought it? Of course, she knew the prince was wandering around the palace, but she never imagined it would be her savior. Cardan noted that the boy was completely unaffected by the explosion in the square. The boy immediately said that he had nothing to do with the incident. He was only helping the princess. The little girl didn't understand what was going on, but something seemed to be wrong. The father thanked the boy for saving his daughter and told him to think about what he would like as a reward, but for now, let him rest. When they were already walking down the corridor, the girl asked why her father was behaving like that to her savior. The young man replied that the fact that Ard was a prince made a difference. There is no need to mess with the imperial family. The girl asked that, in that case, who would protect this poor boy? On the way home, Cardan explained to the girl the relationship between the two princes. The older of the two is Adrian Edicus Dandelicus. The younger is Neister Fell Dundelicus, but only the second son is treated as a prince. As children, they studied together. The first prince showed excellent results in all subjects, so the emperor dismissed all teachers. Adrian, who had no support from either his family or the aristocracy, soon became a shadow in the imperial palace. The more everyone around him in high society talked about Neister, the faster his older brother was forgotten. The little girl asked why they were doing this to him. After all, he was still just a child. The young man agreed that it was overkill, but he was born a prince in the imperial palace, and that was his burden. A short while later, they made their way to teacher Teto, who was very happy to see Emily and exclaimed that it had been a long time since they had seen each other. When he tried to climb up for a hug, Cardan stopped him and asked the girl if she remembered what he had told her yesterday. The little girl replied that of course she did. She is not allowed to leave the tower until her father returns. After the incident with Neister, Cardan was hesitant to take her to the palace, so he started working from the duchy. She heard Erwin report that the suspects in the Plaza bombing case had started showing signs of insanity the day after their arrest, and another day later, 2 of them were found dead. The young man noted that this was very strange, as they had not even had time to interrogate them yet. In addition, on the wall in the dungeon, the date of the opening of the black market was written in blood, and its location was described in detail. This information seems to be reliable. In a couple of days, he will start checking the black market and report back to him with the results. Our heroine found this all very strange and wanted to find out, but first she had to go to the magic tower to visit those who were worried about her. Teto asked if she was all right and how she was feeling. The little girl replied that she was better than ever. Guy took her hand and said that he assumed that because of divine power, it was impossible to accurately assess her current condition. Our heroine asked what to be, then let the priest examine her. The mage replied that he would probably say the same thing he did. Simply put, it would be like drawing conclusions from only half of her body. And if the temple finds out about her condition, the entire continent will be shocked. So it's best to avoid meeting with the priests. The young man then suggested that they start the class and pick up where they left off. But suddenly the young man began to slump, and Emily noted that he seemed to have fallen asleep again. Suddenly Faye appeared in the room, but he looked different. The boy had long hair, so the girl asked what had happened to him in the first place. The boy replied that he had spent too much energy last time, and now there were such consequences. He then asked if it wasn't pretty for him. Amy immediately exclaimed that he looked just amazing. After the girl gave him a ponytail, the boy asked if she had class today and if she knew how to control her power. Tiny answered that, of course, because she had been practicing so hard. She thought to herself that maybe she would soon be able to let fire or wind out of her hands. Or maybe she would surpass Carden in no time at all. After a while, Amy asked why he always put Teacher Teto to sleep when he came over. Faye replied that he doesn't know him yet. The teacher might be good, but he'd rather not hear about him, then asked if the girl wanted him to teach her. The girl thought to herself that the one who was personally chosen by the master of the magic tower, the one who in an instant deciphered the formulas set by the magic tower and the temple, the genius wizard of the age, Faye, was offering her training, so exclaimed that she agreed. The boy began to explain that all magic is based on simple formulas. Her forms vary depending on the formula used. He then demonstrated what he could do, and many different colored lights appeared in the room. The guy then told her to try it, but our heroine replied that it looked very complicated, whether he was sure she could do it or not. Faye said that if something was wrong, he would prompt her. The little girl concentrated, and a blue-colored energy blob began to appear in her hands. The little girl didn't understand what was happening, and she became scared. The boy moved towards her and blocked this energy with his power. Our heroine exclaimed that she didn't mean to and asked why it was suddenly like this. Faye replied that maybe she just wasn't used to it yet. Let her not worry. Now he would show her something cool while there was still a small amount of time. The boy abruptly turned into a cat and started meowing. Tiny didn't think he could do that. When the little girl brought him with her in the carriage, her father asked why she needed him. The little girl exclaimed that he was so cute she would eat and then play with him. Suddenly some man in a cloak appeared in front of the coachman with the horses, and he had to brake sharply. Carden asked loudly what was even going on there. The man apologized and said that a child had suddenly jumped out into the road. The young man stepped outside and saw Arden, who said he had come up with the reward he was talking about. He had a great favor to ask of him. The Duke replied that there were a great many prying eyes around, so let him climb into the carriage. When they had already reached the palace and sat down to drink tea, the young man said to his daughter that she must be very tired, so why not go to her room? Our heroine objected that she was not going anywhere and would stay here. After the prince said that he wanted to learn how to wield a sword, the boy said that he would soon find a good teacher and send to him. But the boy replied that he wanted to be trained by the Duke. Carden asked if he wanted the Duke to stand behind him by any chance. The boy replied that no, he only asked to be trained in swordsmanship as he really wanted to become a swordsman. The girl immediately remembered how Ard had knocked out 3 attackers with just 1 stick. If under the guidance of a good teacher, the prince can fully develop his potential, he will definitely become a great swordsman. The young man already choosing words to refuse the boy, as suddenly our heroine shouted that she also wants to learn sword fighting with him. The man objected that there was no need for her to learn such a dangerous endeavor. Emilet replied that she understood perfectly well that he was worried about her, but how much she would be protected by everyone around her. She wants to be strong too. The little girl was angry at Carden for treating her like a fragile glass figurine. She doesn't want to spend her whole life in someone else's shadow. She needs to be strong in order to protect what she holds dear. Tiny, on the other hand, has already said she will protect her daddy, and this is the perfect chance to learn. She thought to herself that she had missed many opportunities in her past life. Carden, on the other hand, had studied hard to become who he was, and Ard was a little boy who wanted to learn how to defend himself from his abusers and fight back. The young man sighed heavily and said he agreed to teach them both swordsmanship. The little boy rushed to hug him and thanked her father for everything. Then she added that she really loved him very much. She noted to herself that she had never told him these important words, and it was time. The next day, the little girl showed Tedo her magic power, and he didn't understand what it was, because the guy hadn't taught her the formulas for creating such a big tornado. Suddenly Carden appeared, who just snapped his fingers, and the tornado immediately disappeared. He then asked the mage why it was all impossible to control. The young man replied that the princess's understanding of formulas and working with mana has almost reached perfection. But the development is still ongoing, and it might be due to the fact that she possesses two powers. It was interesting that possessing magical and divine energies, would the girl be able to use these abilities at the same time? This, of course, was just his speculation and conjecture, but they could ask the priest for help and try to practice more. The next day, the little girl ran 3 laps and noted that she finally managed it, but with her physical abilities, it was very little. The little one had been practicing fencing for a week now, but her stamina was tight, so she had only been practicing to build up the muscles in her legs and hadn't even touched a sword yet. Unlike Ard, who had successfully passed the basic test and started personal fencing training with Carden. Our heroine watched all this and asked her father not to hit her so hard because he might just knock the boy off his feet and he would fall. When Faye came up to her, the babe asked why he kept coming in the guise of a cat and thought about the fact that Ard was not aware that it was actually a man. The first prince approached Amulet and noted that this animal had come to her again, after which he wanted to pet it a bit, but Faye dodged his hand and went to the other side. The girl said that apparently they do not know each other well yet, and if the boy plays with him, they will eventually become friends. Our heroine then asked how things were going with Neister and clarified that he was telling the truth as it really is. Ard replied that things have been good the last few days. The Emperor's birthday party is next month, so everyone is busy with preparations and there is no time to pester him. When the girl asked that is he really going to go there too, the boy replied that yes, like every year, but he always hides around the corner. Emilet noted to herself that even fencing practice is a big secret, so at the banquet they must pretend not to know each other. At the reception, Ard and she will be the first prince and princess of the Bardion family. A month later, our heroes were on their way to the gala, and the babe noted that her father seemed to be in a terrible mood. So in order to diffuse the situation, she decided to ask if he looked good today. The young man replied that the nanny had done a good job. The girl thought to herself that it was so hard to tell her that she was beautiful. It was as if he would die if he said those words. But suddenly the Duke added that among all the children at the banquet, there would be none who would look better than she did. The little girl immediately smiled happily and replied that there was no doubt that her daddy would also be the most handsome at the feast. At the sight of the Duke's carriage, everyone immediately began to whisper, as they did not expect to see him, because he did not appear at such events for a long time. Of course, there was no discussion of the small child in his arms. When the young man said that that was why he didn't want to come here, Amy realized why he had been in such a bad mood since the morning. When they entered the room where the event would be held, the girl was struck by how luxurious everything was, as she had never been to this kind of celebration. Carden immediately said that if she wanted to leave, just let her say so. The little girl objected that after all, they had just arrived. Suddenly a man's voice rang out who introduced himself as Marquis Maiden of Shepra. He immediately exclaimed that is it really Princess Bardion, who is the youngest student of the Magic Tower. She is so small, yet she is already so beautiful. It was to be expected because she looks so much like her father, the Duke. Our heroine noted to herself that she was only praising her so hypocritically to make herself look better in front of Carden. After him, other guests began to arrive and exclaimed that the little girl was even more beautiful than they had said. Tiny noted to herself that she wanted to get out of there immediately, as she was about to vomit. When they went outside for some fresh air, Emily asked how long they needed to stay in that place. Her father replied that according to the rules of etiquette, they could not leave before the imperial family arrived. Then he told her to wait for a moment, and he would bring her something delicious. While her father was away, our heroine pondered the fact that all this hypocritical talk and pleasantries are not for her. She just wants to run around, to play with Arden, whom she's already seen somewhere in the gym. He never missed a fencing class. He must have proven his skill by now. Will she ever even be able to say hello to him outside the walls of the Duke's house? Then the little girl saw Faye beside her and wondered if he missed her since he decided to come. They were all alone here, so they could chat. But then she noticed that the animal's eyes were blue, which means that it was not her friend, whose eyes were golden. Behind the little girl came the voice of a young man who said that unfortunately the cat was not in the mood to talk right now. The young man is its owner. Our heroine noted that judging by his appearance, he occupies a high place in the hierarchy, and he looks familiar, so the owner of the cat is a handsome blonde. Why, the young man exclaimed that he forgot to introduce himself. His name is Nelvasto. This guy is the second main male character. The guy was once in love with Raina. He was her assistant, best friend, and passionately in love with his girlfriend. Watching her relationship with Carden, the guy couldn't confess his feelings to her, so he decided to hide them deeper. It was unrequited love. Then the young man wanted to introduce her as Kat, but the babe interrupted him and said that his name was Cammy. The young man asked in surprise how she knew that. Cammy is the cat that Raina and Nelvasto found outside the sanctuary. His mother cat abandoned him and he had nothing to eat, causing the kitten to become completely emaciated. The young man sheltered him and was taking him out. It was then that Raina named this animal, Cammy. The boy still carefully raised him. Apparently a bond had formed between them. When asked, Emilet replied that he had black fur, so she thought the name Cammy was appropriate. Nelvasto said he didn't think he'd ever hear it again. That's right, it's because of his black fur that he's named that. The girl has a talent for giving names. The young man had wanted to meet her for a long time. Our heroine understood his desire, for she was the only thing left of Raina, his beloved. But suddenly Carden appeared, and Emilet began to feel a great tension between them. Nelvasto said that it had been a long time since they had seen the Duke. The young man then said it was time for him and his daughter to head back and began to lead Amy away. When they got back to the hall where the celebration was taking place, the girl noted that the emperor had arrived and he looked even fatter than before. People greeted him and said they were honored to meet the ruler of the Dandelicus Empire. Then the empress approached them and said that she was glad that they had come. She couldn't find them and already thought they were the first to go home. That time, the children were just fooling around. The woman hopes it didn't serve as an excuse for misunderstandings. The eldest prince has vision problems, which is why he has so many bruises and abrasions. She just didn't know if it bothered them, so she decided to explain everything. By the way, this time in the sword duel, her prince defeated the younger knight and even defeated the former warrior. The girl thinks that he needs a new teacher to match his current skill level. Finding such an outstanding mentor for Neister is not an easy task. Suddenly there was a rumble of some kind, and everyone saw Ard crashing into a servant, and all the drinks on the tray were knocked over onto him. Those present immediately whispered that if it was the prince's brother, and what was even going on with him. The empress asked if he was all right. His eyesight must not have fully recovered yet, and she was very worried about him. The guests kept whispering that he can't be like this now at this important event. They are brothers, but they do not resemble each other at all, and it is very strange. Our heroine got angry and wanted to intervene, but her father stopped her. She thought to herself that in such a situation she should just stand by and watch. What is this another ordeal on Ard's soul? Why? He had clearly been pushed by Neister to humiliate him in front of everyone. If a boy finds himself in a situation from which he cannot escape, no matter how hard he tries to resist it, he can only suffer. Suddenly, Carden walked toward him and told him to get up or he would hurt himself on the shards. He had already told him that it was important to take care of his body and health. Let him not let it affect tomorrow's training. The young man then reached out a hand to the boy and helped him to his feet. The empress didn't understand what kind of training he was talking about and dumbfoundedly asked what he was talking about. The Duke replied that he was the swordsmanship teacher of this capable boy. He believes that the eldest prince has every chance of learning to wield a sword professionally. The woman said she was concerned about his poor eyesight, but he didn't notice any such problem during the lessons. It seems that this place is not used to taking care of the eldest prince. The Duke would definitely find a swordsmanship teacher for his brother, after which she told His Highness that it was necessary to go change clothes. The little girl noted that today Carden had not just given Ard a helping hand. Today, what had been hidden for so long was revealed. Duke Bardion's clan had sided with the elder prince. As the boy changed his clothes, he asked the young man why he had decided to help him. The young man replied that despite being treated so horribly, he continued to stand idly by, so he had to intervene. It was hard to believe that the eldest prince and Duke Bardion were not very close, but the relationship between teacher and student was very strong. Obviously, Carden, who had originally remained neutral, was now siding with the boy. Now, not only the royal nobility, but also important foreign figures will not look down on Ard, who is the heir to the throne. Our heroine realized that now that Carden has decided to side with justice, nothing will stop him and Ard from being together. So the little girl grabbed his hand and dragged him along, telling him that they would now go and eat something delicious. The next day, the little girl noted that she was very tired. She didn't know when she would be able to hold a sword in her hands. The little girl didn't want to say it or admit it, but her father looks rather intimidating when he is training. When the artist approached her, our heroine exclaimed that he had done a good job and let her drink some water, then asked if anything had happened at home yesterday. The boy replied that he was annoyed with everyone. He recalled how after he was recognized by Carden, everyone immediately became very polite and addressed him as His Highness. They also discussed that the prince had a powerful swordsman aura and tried to get to know him, but the expression on Neister's face was simply unforgettable. Thanks to Duke Sama, no one dares to insult him now. The little girl thought to herself that this was simply unbelievable. In his dealings with the nobility, Ard was facing the same thing she was. The boy then added that he would be sure to repay her for everything. Emilet said he was not to be thanked. Nothing would have happened without his diligence. He would become an excellent swordsman in the future. His older sister was sure of it. The boy objected that she wasn't too young to be his senior. He's already 10 years old. Amy said that she is older than him. The boy replied that she might be, but she still looked younger. Faye suddenly appeared, and the girl was surprised that he came in his true form, because at Arda he always appeared in the form of a cat. Our heroine introduced them to each other and told them to say hello and separate. But the guys were extremely awkward since previously they had no friends, and the girl is the first with whom they normally communicated. Then the girl noticed a handkerchief lying on the ground and decided to pick it up to wash it for Ard. Intercepted him and told him to let him do it. Our heroine did not understand what was happening. When the boy approached the prince and began to wipe the sweat from his forehead, the little girl wondered if Faye wanted to get close to him. When Ard had to go back to the palace, the little girl decided to show her friend her room, which he would see for the first time. The babe immediately pointed out the merkit she was raising and informed him that one was named Sudar and the other Johnny. The young man remarked that they were very cute and went to look at the room. Our heroine did not understand why the plants were so quiet because usually they could not be shut up. In the bedroom entered the nanny, who brought cookies and exclaimed that the princess had done a very good job today. If you eat too much of the floury stuff, you might get sick, so have them divided amongst themselves 3 pieces at a time. Biting into a piece with pleasure, Emily thought to herself that if she knew how to bake cookies, she would eat them as much as she liked. There was an urgent need to pursue the matter and learn. When the little girl noticed that the woman was putting on her coat, she asked if she was going somewhere. The nanny replied that she wanted to take a walk to the central square, plus she needed to send a letter. She'll be back soon, but don't let the kids go anywhere. The boys have already looked at each other and decided to go for a walk wherever they want. The girl left a letter to the nanny where she informed that she went for a walk with Faye so that she would not worry too much. Walking through the shopping plaza, Amy noted that the forbidden fruit is sweet. The boy, on the other hand, was remembering the first time they went for a walk. Suddenly, Amy heard 2 men talking. One of them said that relatives from Pardo Manor had told him that they had found a huge pile of Wolam corpses in their neighborhood. The interlocutor exclaimed to me to talk nonsense. The estate is very far from the northern mountains. Where would these creatures come from? And the man replied that this is why the estate is in chaos at the moment, and it is all very dangerous. The little girl was shocked at the information she heard, for these monsters had traveled beyond the north, after which she told Faye that they should go back. Suddenly there were screams that a carriage had hit a man. There was a lot of blood all around, and those present were shouting that they should call the mage priests, or at least the guards. While there was turmoil and no one could find a priest, our heroine could not believe her eyes, because it was her nanny. Whereupon she screamed for someone to help her immediately. grabbed her by the shoulders, and told her to come to her senses. They must go to the temple immediately. The boy then quickly teleported everyone to the right place with his magical abilities. The two clerics of the church immediately started running towards them and shouting where the man had come from. Could it really be the work of a magician? How dare they invade the sanctuary? They should, as soon as possible, report this to the Holy Father. The girl shouted that, "Don't they see the man is hurt? She is Duke Bardian's daughter. Let them help them, for every second is precious." Suddenly, Nelvasto appeared, and our heroine begged him to save her nanny. The young man told her not to worry, for he would do everything in his power. Then the young man sat down near the woman and began the healing process, saying that everything would be all right. Then he ordered the clergy to take her to the restroom, for she needed rest now. The little girl immediately rushed to hug him tightly and thank him for everything, but the young man objected that it was his responsibility. It suddenly dawned on Emilet that Nelvasto was the Holy Father, the man who is the authority for the entire sacred temple. Suddenly, the Holy Father's pussycat ran, and the girl dragged Faye by the arm for him to look at her. She then noticed that the boy did not look well and asked him if he was all right. Faye replied that he was. Nelvasto said he didn't think so. He should take a little break. The young man escorted him to the room where the nanny was resting. The boy would not lie down on the bed, and our heroine noted that he could actually lie down and rest quietly, but the boy is so stubborn. The Holy Father told the little girl that she should not worry so much. After a good rest, the woman will quickly come to her senses. After that, he asked if she wanted to take a walk, because there was something to see in this place. During the walk, the girl turned to him and called him Holy Father. The boy wondered why she had changed her address to him so abruptly. He was more used to her calling him less formally. The little girl exclaimed that she would then call him Mr. Nelvasto. But the boy objected that it sounded a little impolite and let her just call him uncle, since he could be her real uncle. He and Raina spent a lot of time together and were like brother and sister. After these words, not a single bit of regret or sadness shone on the young man's face, though his eyes were full of love. When our heroine called him uncle, the guy began to fuss with her and said that she was a good girl. The girl got angry and said that stop talking to her like that because she is not that small. After a while, the guy said that the princess looks a lot like her mom, especially when she frowns, puffing up her cheeks in discontent, and she must have taken after her father in giftedness. He had heard that the little girl was studying in a magic tower and already knew how to use movement magic. After that, he asked if it was true. Let her not be embarrassed because it's really amazing. Our heroine wanted to start explaining everything to him, but then remembered the teacher's words that while the identity of the Fae should be kept secret, it is not necessary to tell about him somewhere. Amy decided she had to keep her promise. The little girl decided to change the subject and asked where so much water came from in this place. Her uncle explained that it was all holy. If the possessor of divine power drinks this water, he will be able to replenish his strength. And if you water the flowers with it, they will start blooming in a second. Our heroine immediately thought of the Mercateers. Maybe the holy water could help them. So she asked the young man if she could take some water with her. The Holy Father replied that, of course. He didn't know why she needed it, but let her use it wisely. If she needed more, she could come back any time. Now it's time to say goodbye. Plus, her nanny must be awake by now. On their way to the restroom, they ran into Carden, who was holding a cleric by the scruff of the neck. At the sight of his daughter, he immediately ran up to her and asked if she was all right. The girl replied that she was fine. The young man then cast a glance at Nelvasto and asked what she was doing with him. Almost immediately, the boy sent to the room where the woman was resting to see if she was all right. But the nanny independently came out to meet them, and our heroine, without losing a second, rushed to her and began to embrace her, saying that she thought she would never see her again. The woman replied that she was already fine and let the baby not worry so much. Thanks to her, she was perfectly fine now. After a while, the Duke said that it was time for them to go home already. The little girl said that first she needed to find Faye and went to look for him, adding that she would explain everything to him later. Carden wanted to go with her, but Nelvasto grabbed his arm and stopped him, saying that he needed to learn something from him about the princess. When Amy ran into the room where Faye was supposed to be resting in a chair, she didn't find him there and wondered where he had gone. Meanwhile, the saint was talking to Carden about wanting to protect Lady Raina's daughter. The Duke exclaimed that this was simply outrageous, as he himself was able to protect his daughter. There was no need to worry so much. The cleric stated that he was aware that she had divine power. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to do the same thing with the flowers she watered. If the babe didn't have divine power, she wouldn't have been able to make them bloom. He had no evil intentions, but since the man felt he didn't need his help, so be it. The young man didn't say anything in response to this, but simply grabbed his daughter by the hand and began to lead her away from the temple. After a while, Tedo was told off for constantly falling asleep in class and introduced to Emily another teacher, who was Uncle Nelvasto, who would also be teaching her from that day on. Our heroine gently asked if Uncle Nelvasto was allowed to tutor her. When the young man heard the babe call him, he immediately darkened with anger and interjected that she had said just that. Ignoring this, Amy replied that the saint had said she could address him that way. Her father objected that she should just call him teacher. Nelvasto, however, added that she could call him uncle when Papa wasn't around. Taking her hand, the young man said that he had heard of her ability, and it was truly amazing. In terms of strength, she's not inferior to the great priests. Apparently that's why she's in trouble. Tiny replied that yes, she can't use magic properly. The guy said that her divine power is still asleep. They should try to awaken it first. Taking her hand, the young man said that he would now transfer some of his spiritual energy to her. Let her close her eyes and concentrate. Then she should definitely succeed. Our heroine began to feel something warm spilling into her body. It was very different from the usual mana flows and seemed like it was about to burst out. Noting the light lilac color of the energy that began to hover around the room, Nelvasto said that it was Reina. She had the exact same color of divine powers. It was simply amazing that she had both magic and holy energy coexisting within her. On top of that, she also inherited her parents' colors. Before, our heroine just knew that she had divine powers, but now she has seen it with her own eyes. Maybe she will be able to use some kind of spell. Tiny must release her magical abilities and holy energy at the same time. Two huge formations of black and lilac coloring immediately appeared in the room. This meant that the little girl had succeeded. Tedo was delighted by what he saw, as he had always thought that such a thing was simply impossible and unrealistic to see in person. Nelvasto said that power is power, but the talent of the princess is really amazing. They have a lot to learn ahead of them, and he hopes the princess will be diligent. A while later, the little girl amused herself by giving her daddy either glasses or a mustache made of water. She couldn't quite believe that she had finally managed to curb her powers. The young man interrupted her and said that the little girl must be very curious to know as much as she could about her mother. The little girl was confused. Of course she was interested, but this was the first time she had ever heard of Rain from Carden. The daughter, like him, wields magical power and, like Raina, divine power, only he doesn't understand how that could even happen. But the Duke can guess how Raina would react to it. The girl would say that one power is good, but two is even better. The young man then handed her some kind of box and said that it contained a bracelet her mother had worn. Raina wanted to give it to her in case of divine power awakening. It is infused with divine energy and stabilizes the mind and body of its wearer. The young man noted that it suited her. In any case, he would want his daughter to have it with her, something in memory of her mother. After a while, the little girl ran into her room and exclaimed to Mercatum that she had holy water. Unlike ordinary water, it was imbued with divine power. But that wasn't all. Now the little girl could use magic. The flowers exclaimed in delight that this was very cool. Finish watering them, the little girl said that she had brought it especially for them. Then she asked if they could feel anything. But the plants answered that they did not. They just refreshed a little, as if, like ordinary water. The girl was upset by this fact, and it was good that she didn't blurt out anything unnecessary. Suddenly the plant said that it was the water that made them feel happy. Late in the night, there were screams from the Merkits asking Amy to wake up and look at them immediately. The girl opened her eyes and exclaimed what had happened at all and why they were making such a fuss. But then our heroine saw that the buds had blossomed and the flowers had finally bloomed. Two little glowing orbs were flying above her, screaming that they were now free. They couldn't believe that they had managed to get out of the flowers. After that, they began to thank our heroine. The little girl was very happy that she managed to break the curse and free the innocent souls. Suddenly, a maid entered the room, wished the girl a good morning, and said that it was time for her to get ready for classes. After thinking for a while, Tedo said that the little girl must have managed to bewitch those fireflies. Then he asked if that was true. Amy thought to herself that when she first saw them, she thought they were just talking bugs. The Duke informed her that it wasn't about magic at all. They were summoned from these Merkits. The mage was very surprised that they had bloomed. after which he started asking how she managed to do it. None of his ways were working. The spheres exclaimed that it was all thanks to the Emma. They were actually fairies who were imprisoned in those flowers. The girl gave them holy water and set them free. The boy exclaimed that how could this be possible, since they did not look like fairies at all. Our heroine explained that she first heard the voices when she saw them in the laboratory. Ever since then, she had been looking for a way to break the curse. Tedo noted that meant the plants had been talking to her all this time. But why was it that only the princess heard their voice, and when the guy watered them with holy water, there was absolutely no result? Maybe it was all about the power that the princess was endowed with. The fairies said that the girl is not like everyone else. She has a special aura that other people do not have. Her power is different from the one that imprisoned them in the flowers. Even if the entire world were to undergo a change, Amy would not be affected. Tiny thought to herself that was right because she has two powers, which is almost impossible. The young man asked what if it didn't affect just them. Spheres replied that anyone could be subjected to the power of change and be imprisoned like them. Both animals and humans, not just magical beings. The children asked what it means to change people and animals. The fairies explained that, for example, they were stuck as flowers, but others took on a different appearance. They grew a lot and became very noisy. The teacher immediately showed them a picture of the volumes and asked if it looked like what they were talking about. The fairies exclaimed that he was just great at drawing and it was very similar. Our heroine noted that people and animals are becoming these creatures and it made her sad. Carden said that the northern mountains have been closed to them for 300 years. If the fairies' words are true, there are almost no humans among these creatures. Most of them are wild animals. Tedo said that those will mutate, which will cause volumas to keep appearing. Maybe they should set up a barrier in the north. If they block off part of the area and limit the wild animals' access, the number of those creatures could decrease drastically. The young man replied that it sounded reasonable and should work. He would consult with the head of the magic tower. The men in the background were discussing that if everything succeeded, this horror might finally be over. But the problem was how to create a barrier for all the northern lands. After all, it was a bit of an expense. Tiny thought to herself that even the original novel did not reveal the real reason for the appearance of these creatures, so it was necessary to find out more about it. Suddenly the fairies began to fall and the girl ran to catch them, after which she asked what happened to them, whether they were hurt. The fairies said that it seemed that their strength was leaving them. They are creatures that need to live in the wild. They barely manage to maintain their current appearance. They usually look very different. To make sure that no fairy ever falls into the trap of the northern lands again, it is imperative that word of the danger spreads as soon as possible. Tiny tearfully asked if they were going to leave her. The Merkits asked her not to worry and told her that as soon as they have strength, they will surely return. They give her their word. The fairies then flew out the window to warn their kind about possible danger. The boys told the princess not to worry so much. Erwin stated that where there is a meeting, there is also a parting. Then he said he was confused, and that wasn't what he meant at all. Babe wondered if they were really worried about her. She's sad, of course, but not to the point where they worry so much about her. She then said that in order for her not to be so sad, Babe wanted to eat some sweets. The boys immediately started shouting to the maids to bring something to eat immediately. After learning the secret of the origin of these creatures, Carden told everything to the head of the magic tower and the Holy Father, who were the key figures in the subjugation of the North. And the teacher set about researching the vast amount of ancient materials. A few days later, the little girl sat eating cookies and thought that she was getting thirsty because she was eating a lot of sweets, or rather only sweets. Maybe she should bake something else. Suddenly, a Holy Father appeared in front of her face and asked her if she could bake cookies. The little girl exclaimed where did he come from and in general how long had he been sitting there. The boy replied that it hadn't been very long. Once down, Nelvasto asked why the princess was walking alone in the park. The girl replied that she just wanted to spend time alone with herself. The saint, on the other hand, said that he was bored sitting alone in the temple, so he decided to come here. Then he added that everyone loves to pray to God so much that they are ready to wipe their knees in blood. The girl thought to herself, what kind of a clergyman can say such things? Then suddenly Mammy said that he knew a way that would help her to cheer up. Wouldn't she like to try it? The young man said to climb on his back. Tiny thought to herself that after all she is not so small, but it is worth a try. To the great surprise of our heroine, the saint was not just going to carry her on his back, but sharply began to climb up the wall. The little girl screamed for him to stop, for she wanted to cheer herself up, not to die. The boy did not hear what she said and asked not to pull his hair so hard, because it hurt him. But suddenly the girl forgot all her fears, for she saw before her a marvelous view of the palace grounds. The saint said that it is breathtaking, isn't it? Our heroine exclaimed that it was simply marvelous and a lot of fun. But suddenly, Emily saw her father below, and the expression on his face was absolutely malevolent. Nelvasto noted that even on the roof he could feel Cardin's aura. He felt that if they didn't come down now, he would just kill them, so let the princess hold on tight. Then the young man abruptly descended with our heroine to the ground. The Duke told his daughter to come up to him immediately. He began to ask her what would have happened if she had fallen. Does she even realize that she might have broken something? The girl replied that she did. The father said that if she understood, why did she do it, and now she was standing there with such an expression on her face. The saint asked her not to scold her too much and not to be so strict because he was the one who took her there. Cardin said that if a single hair fell from her head, he would be in trouble. The young man replied that the Duke knew that he would not allow such a thing to happen. Therefore, his worries were in vain. Tiny noted to herself that it is very difficult with them because they absolutely do not get along. When her father asked why the saint had come here, the boy took out a pouch from his pocket and handed it to Emilet, saying that he had brought her homework. Then he asked her what she thought priests did. The little girl answered uncertainly that it was purification. The boy replied that, right, they do more than just heal living things. Just recently she had almost thrown up his hair, but now it was fine. It could be considered a cleansing. Our heroine didn't understand what the catch was. The saint explained that there are more important things than healing. This includes cleansing with the help of divine power. First, we must start with the basics. What's in the bag is what the clergy call the seeds of death. What he is about to describe usually occurs naturally in places where the aura of death is prevalent. As the seeds are filled with energy, the aura of death envelops the earth and contaminates everything in the area to the point where life can no longer exist there. The little girl replied that means with divine power, they can be rid of the aura of death. Nelvasto added that she should try to completely purify them by the next lesson. A while later, the woman finished braiding our heroine's pigtails and said she would go get her some warm milk so she could go to sleep. Tiny thought to herself that today was just a wonderful day. But suddenly she heard Cardin's irritated voice asking if she had enjoyed climbing on the roof. Emilet decided not to tell the truth and said she didn't even know. She thought it would be a lot more fun. The young man countered that still, the two of them were running around like crazy. What would happen if they fell from that height? Would she really want to lie in bed again without getting up? The girl guessed he wasn't angry, but worried about her. She didn't even think about it. Stretching her arms forward, the little girl said he could hit her as hard as she made him worry, and as much as she made him upset. Amy thought to herself that she should be punished just as she had been in her previous life. The young man asked in surprise at what she was even saying. He would not beat her, but the little girl insisted that he would hit her harshly. Nanny suddenly entered the room, who was shocked at what she had heard. The Duke immediately exclaimed that it was not as it looked from the outside. After a while, Erwin taught our heroine how to properly stand in a sword-fighting stance. The girl had already dreamed that she would become a swordsman as brilliant as her father. When the teacher said that they had finished practicing for the day, Amy fell to her knees exhaustedly. Suddenly Faye ran up to her and started wiping the sweat from her forehead, saying that she had done a very good job today. The boy who suddenly disappeared from the temple a couple of days ago came over and apologized for pulling her for a walk the day Cardin caught her. Noticing the guy glaring menacingly after them, Faye said that the Duke didn't seem to be in the mood lately. A short while later, our heroine was playing a game of Jenga with her friends. Noticing that the little girl was chowing down on cookies, Ard asked if she had had breakfast. The girl replied that she had, but because of her training, she was always hungry. Faye said that she might grow up that way, too. The little girl exclaimed that she thought she was getting a little taller. Ard volunteered to measure her height to see how much she had grown after all. Showing a very small section with his fingers, the boy exclaimed that she had grown that much. Our heroine was very disappointed. The young man, on the other hand, was very amused to watch all this childish talk. Suddenly, Erwin entered the room and said that he had brought what the Duke had asked him for last time. After reading what was written, the Duke asked if they were sure of it. The young man replied that he was. If the Lord's words are to be believed, he saw it all with his own eyes. Therefore, he thought it was necessary for Carden to look at it. Then they heard some rumbling, and it turned out that the kids just had Jenga crumbled. The knight noted that the three of them seemed to be getting very close. The young man went over to his daughter and asked if she wanted to see the sea. After a while, they were already riding in a carriage, and the girl noticed that there was obviously something wrong with her father, which meant that something had happened. The young man had become like this since yesterday. Then Faye had said that he would be very bored and lonely during Amy's absence. The Duke countered that she was only going away for a week. The boy said that he was still very sad. Then he asked the girl if she would not be bored and lonely there, especially when the Duke was busy with his business. The little girl immediately exclaimed that if he didn't want to go along with them, then asked Papa if they could take Faye and Ard with them, as it would be more fun together. When the babe didn't understand what it was that made her father so disappointed, Erwin prompted her that the Duke must have wanted to spend time alone with her. Our heroine should have been thinking about him, not unfulfilled dreams from her past life. But looking at her friends, our heroine noted that in any case it would be just the best trip. After a while, the little girl already thought that it was the worst trip ever, as she felt very bad. Looking at Ard, who was telling her to look out the window as he had never seen such beauty, the babe was thinking about whether she was the only one feeling bad. But Faye was also very pale, which meant that he was just as unwell as she was, so the babe asked her father for the coachman to stop. While they were puking near the trees, our heroine thought that it might not be worthwhile to continue this trip. After a while, the young man woke up our heroine, for it was already time to wake up, as they had almost arrived in Pardo. Looking out of the window, the little girl saw the sea and asked Ard whether it was the first time he had seen it. The boy replied that yes, he had only seen it in pictures before. It felt as if it were all just a dream. Emilet then turned her attention to Faye and asked how long he had been asleep. Ard replied that he had fallen asleep about the same time as the girl. Suddenly he woke up abruptly and was very surprised from sleeping on his friend's lap, so he started apologizing for it. Amy remarked that he had slept so sweetly that I was now drooling. The boy asked if that was true, but the girl reassured him that she was only joking. After a while, the aristocrats met the guests and said that it was an honor to meet Duke Bardion. The man sees that his little girl arrived with him as well as two boys, but he did not know that he still had sons. The young man replies that these boys are his daughter's friends. Usually aristocrats don't make friends with those below them in status. With such people, they just play and have fun. Of course, they also marry only people of equal rank. The manor master replied that he understood. Then he said that they must be very tired after the trip, so let them pass as soon as possible. After a while, our heroine clarified where her father's room would be, and the maids admired what a pretty princess. When her father opened the door, with his shirt unbuttoned, Emily exclaimed that he should button it immediately, as at this rate he would charm all the maids, and no one would be able to work. The young man immediately buttoned up, and the little girl told him to be more careful in the future. Then she added that it was time to go to dinner. Sitting down at the table, the girl noted that almost all the dishes were made of seafood. The hostess said that today's menu is made up of their family specialties. All ingredients are very fresh, straight from the sea. Our heroine noted that she had not eaten such a dish for a long time and started to reach for the fish. But the young man practically snatched the plate from her hands and began to help her cut it. Emilet mumbled that she could do it herself. Handing her back a fillet of boneless fish, the young man asked her to speak up if she needed anything to serve. Trying a bite of it, the crumb noted that it was just incredibly delicious. Then she noticed that one of the sons of the owners did not take his eyes off her. The girl didn't understand why he was staring at her like that. How can you look at a person when he is eating? It suddenly dawned on the landlady that they had forgotten to introduce the children. The son thanked her for her attention and said his name was Ayat Pardo. He will be 9 years old this year. He will make sure they have a good time at their estate. Our heroine noted that he was trying to seem mature, but in fact he was just a child. Then Emilet noticed a girl and her face looked very familiar, but she didn't realize where she had seen her before. The girl mumbled that her name was Amy Pardo, and she was 6 years old. The woman apologized and said that her little girl, because of her age, had difficulty with manners. Everyone knows she's 6 years old. Just like the beautiful princess who looks so much like her father, the little girl decided it was worth showing them her other side, so she said aloud that this compliment was very sudden. She still had a lot of work to do to become more like her father. The woman marveled that it was a delight to the ears. The little girl, however, thought to herself that she wondered how Cardine would like her new role. Erwin and the father became very funny, so they began to try to hide their laughter by coughing. The next day, our heroine saw Faye and Ard talking to a little girl, and she was very curious as to what it was they were doing there. When the little girl said good morning and asked what they were chatting about, the owner's daughter silently started running away. Emily asked what they were here talking about. Faye said she just asked to play with her. Tiny asked what they told her in response to that. The boys said that they had already promised to play with her, so they went looking for her. After a while, Tiny was running down the pier and shouting that she needed to get down to the water. She was also impressed by the large number of ships, and in general there was incredible beauty all around. Faye shouted that she should not run with her head up, but look under her feet and be careful. On the beach, the girl noticed flowers that looked a lot like merkits. It was curious how Sudar and Johnny were doing. There were more and more evil, cursed creatures in the north every day. I guess Carden would have to go there again. There were getting to be too many of them. Our heroine thought about how there was no way to put an end to this disaster once and for all. Then she happened to overhear some women talking to a merchant. The man said that since the ban on traveling on the mountain road, the herbs she needed were impossible to get. They'd been living like this for a month now. She remembered the conversation between the two boys in the market square, that a relative who lived in Pardo had told her that the Voluma's corpses had been found at the foot of the mountains. So everything that had been said was true. When Faye asked what she was thinking about, the girl replied that she understood why her father had decided to come here, but she will tell all the details later, but now it is necessary to go for a walk. Emmett ran ahead of her friends and talked about how today was a very interesting day. Faye asked what she liked most of all, but the little girl did not have time to answer anything, because Aeth appeared in front of her and said that he heard that she had decided to walk around the estate. The girl replied that yes, and they had a very good time. The boy asked where they had already gone. It is after all one of his duties to tell them about the worthy places of their estate. Next time he would go with them and let her take his word for it. It would be much more fun with him. Our heroine gloomed and asked if he thought she was not having fun with her boys. She thought to herself that he had grown up in the middle of nowhere and decided to act like an arrogant nobleman. The boy exclaimed that he didn't mean it. It's just that he thinks a princess should socialize with people from high society. The kid replied that, in that case, she should all the more not socialize with him. What makes him think the Bardian family name is his equal? Her friends were not the type to be addressed in such a manner, so let her apologize. Aeth exclaimed that why should he ask for forgiveness from commoners? Lastly, our heroine advised him to ask his parents about the status of these guys. After that, let him not forget to come running with an apology. The little girl thought to herself about Prince Ard and Mage Faye not revealing their identities. Obviously, it's impossible to say who they really are. It was all kind of even a bit childish. Aeth, as a normal child, should just reach out to his peers, not show off. But he's already separating people by status, and that must be what his parents keep telling him. You can't judge other people like that. Faye asked about maybe going to scold him for ruining her mood so much. The little girl laughed at that and asked how he was going to punish him. Would he really cast a spell at night? The boy was too good to do such a thing. Honestly, none of this really upset her, but thanks for the offer. Tiny wants him to realize his own mistake. After a while, our heroine ran up to her father and said that she missed him very much, after which she added that she had been walking with Ard and Faye all this time and only recently returned, and what was her daddy doing. The man explained that he was discussing very important matters. The girl heard the subordinates discussing something and talking about the need to prepare the crew. Then she asked Carden if something had happened. The young man replied that she did not need to know. He would rather take her to see the estate tomorrow. Emily exclaimed that this was great and meant they could spend the whole day together. Sometime later, late at night, the babe saw her father getting into a carriage and getting ready to go somewhere. She knew that something was up. Just in time, her friends stopped by and brought her a cloak and were ready to hit the road. As Faye put his foot on the railing, Ard yelled out what he was doing, for they were on the 4th floor. But then the boy saw that his friend began to float in the air and was simply shocked by this. Our heroine at first did not understand why he was so surprised, but then remembered that the prince did not know that Faye has magic. The magician held out his hand and told him not to be afraid, he would help him down. After a while, the boys were already following the Duke with Erwin sitting in a tall tree. The master of the manor pointed to the corpse of the creature and said that it was the last of the 3 Volumians that had been found in the area. Thankfully, they were dead, so there were no casualties, but their appearance in these parts was a mystery. The little girl noted that this was the first time she had ever seen a real volume. He was so huge that Carden and Irwin seemed tiny next to them. Faye worriedly asked how on earth they had managed to get to these parts. It was so far away, and the environment was unfamiliar to them. Irwin noted that all 3 corpses were in the same condition. It was as if they had died immediately after the transformation. Carden replied that that might be the case. The young man will increase the number of mages and priests in Pardo Manor. The man thanked the Duke and said he would quickly bring a carriage here in return. Irwin asked Carden if he was going to tell the princess about everything. Maybe she could solve the mystery like she did with the Merkits. Her father replied that she is just a child and he doesn't want to take away her childhood. She is only 6 years old, and the young man doesn't want her to see the horrors of the world. He doesn't want her to have the childhood that he had. The little girl was very touched to the core by these words. Then she told Fairy that they must go back immediately, for they must get to the palace before Papa. But the boy continued to stare fearfully at the corpses of the creatures and seemed not to hear Amulet. When she called his name, the boy seemed to come to his senses and said that of course it was time to move out. Back at the manor, Ard and Amy noted that Faye seemed to be quite shaken by what he had seen. The prince said that he himself was shocked, but now it was clear why the Duke had come to this land. Then the boy asked if our heroine was all right. The little girl replied that everything was fine, thanked him for going with her, and said good night. When Baby was alone, she pondered the fact that Carden must have had to deal with similar things all his life. The babe remembered Tedo talking about how one day she would be able to use 2 powers at the same time, though scientists had not yet found the length of this method, for such a thing is not common. Volumes can only be struck by magic, and then the divine power of purification will finish the job and destroy them completely. Slaying these creatures requires the possession of 2 powers. If the little girl can use both powers, will she be able to deal with this problem? To begin with, she will need to train herself in purification. That is exactly what she will begin to do starting tomorrow. Then our heroine noticed that the door was ajar, but it was strange as Faye was leaving through the window. The next day, the babe woke up and felt very tired, as she had not slept at all due to various thoughts in her head. Emilet then noticed that there was some commotion going on all around. Servants were running back and forth and wailed that it was necessary to call a doctor. Following our heroine appeared Carden, who asked what had happened and why there was such a panic. The woman explained that her daughter had been feeling unwell since the morning. Every hour she was getting worse and worse, so they came to the conclusion that it was necessary to urgently call a healer. Then apologized for having to involve the Duke's maids too. The little girl wondered where her friends had gone. As far as she could remember, they had been talking to Amy about something yesterday morning. At that moment, the girl looked healthy, so what could have happened to her in such a short period of time? When her mom wanted to give Amy the medicine, the girl started screaming that she didn't want to take it and let everyone leave her alone. Unexpectedly, our heroes came up to her and asked how the baby was feeling. They were very worried about her, so they decided to visit. The child exclaimed that she was very happy to see her brothers. Emilet noted to herself that for some reason the girl continued to ignore her. When Amy said that she wanted the boys to hold her hand, the princess pushed them forward and wished them good fun. Then, our heroine happened to overhear a conversation with a doctor, who said that he was very sorry, but he could not determine the cause of this disease, but fortunately, it was not contagious. The only thing to do now is to give her antipyretics and watch her. It's hard to get herbs at a time like this, much less medicine. After a while, Amy finally fell asleep, and her mother thanked the boys for helping to calm her. Emilet noted to herself that Carden must have treated her with the same care and concern when she was sick. Suddenly, the little girl woke abruptly and screamed for the boys. Her father suggested that her brother come to her, but the child screamed that she didn't need him here, where Faye and Ard had gone. Our heroine began to be frightened by this behavior, and she did not understand what was happening to her at all. Then she heard her father tell her that the guys cannot obey her and always be near her. This caused the little girl to start sobbing very loudly and hysterically. The man grabbed his head and said that she didn't seem to stop. He then asked if the boys could stay a little longer. The prince and the wizard looked at Emilet confused and asked what she thought they should do in a situation like this. Tiny thought to herself that she would really not like it, but apparently the little girl really feels bad, besides she is very small. So she replied that it was okay. They could stay with her until Amy was better. The exhausted father immediately began to thank the princess for her kindness. A few days later in the evening, our heroine met Ard in the corridor and asked how Amy was feeling. The boy immediately gestured for her to keep her voice down. He barely made it out of there and doesn't want to get caught. Amulet asked, "That is it really that bad?" The boy replied that it's not just bad, it's horrible. As soon as they move away from her bed, the little girl starts sobbing hysterically and demanding that they come back. Okay, still Ard, but Fairy is the hardest. The girl won't let him go for a second at all. Emily apologizes for getting them into this. They have to go home soon and they haven't even taken a walk around the estate. The boy replied that it was fine and said that he should be heading back by now. Our heroine apologized once again and asked to tell Fairy her apology. After a while, the little girl sat thinking about how she had never practiced cleansing. Emilet remembered walking with her father a couple hours ago, enjoying the silence and thinking about how while Faye and Ard were being tormented, she and her dad were out here chilling and doing nonsense. Then she quickly pushed all unnecessary thoughts aside and told herself that she needed to start practicing. Opening her suitcase, Emilet didn't see the seeds Nelvasto had given her. She was almost 100% sure she had taken them with her. Could it be that someone had dared to steal them? The girl began to relate the facts that it was not long before she noticed that the door to her room was open. Then remembered the words of the Holy Father that the seed of death does not affect the bearers of divine power, but for ordinary people it is deadly dangerous, so precautions should be observed. Running into Amy's room, our heroine noted that there was no one around. Suddenly, the baby got sick because of these seeds, and she almost immediately began to act. Amulet did not understand how she should act in such a situation. Suddenly, there was the voice of Faye, who greeted the babe and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. Amulet immediately told him that she seemed to understand why the babe was sick. When the boy was silent and did not answer or even ask anything, our heroine guessed that he was aware of everything. Faye said that after absorbing the seeds of death, the chances of survival are minimal. With that information, it would be much harder for the girl. Our heroine objected that he should have told her about it. Something should be done urgently, and a clergyman should be summoned here. But the boy replied that this would not help her in any way. When she had stolen the seeds of death, they had instantly infiltrated her system. No matter how much the priest tried to purify her system, it would all be in vain. And anyway, Amy should pay for what she did. She was just unlucky. If she had stolen Emilet's clothes or something else, she wouldn't be lying dying right now. What happened is what happened. That girl brought her own death to a close. Our heroine asked how much time she had left. The guy said he didn't know for sure, but it wouldn't be long. Emilet asked if she has a chance to get out of this terrible state. Faye replied that he didn't even know what could help her, or if there was any way at all. Unless she could be purified by divine power and magic, but only a few could do that. The little girl asked if Faye knew how to do such a thing. The boy replied that he couldn't use two powers at the same time. The girl said frustratedly that they could only wait for the baby to die. Then she said that maybe she could do it, because if she didn't have that ability, Nelvasto wouldn't have given her such a task, and asked what the boy thought about it. The wizard replied that she had never even tried it or practiced it. Emilet replied that she should at least try and see if she could do it. The main thing was to focus, because that was the most important part. Suddenly, a powerful energy appeared in the room, which was much more powerful and sinister than the seeds of death. The girl didn't understand what was happening, but she convinced herself that she could handle everything and just had to try. You can't give up so easily. Faye asked her to stop, because she could carelessly hurt herself. But the girl was not going to give up and said that it was necessary to try a little more, because if she did not clean the seeds, Amy will die. Thinking that this could not go on, the boy turned around and began to go somewhere. After a while, he came back and handed our heroine a small bag. In it were the seeds of death, and Faye said to start by trying to do everything with them. If she tried to purify the man at once, she would greatly overload her body, which might not be able to take it. For all the time of communication with her, the boy has already realized that no matter how much she was not stopped, the crumb still from his will not give up, as very stubborn. After that, the wizard said that they would see each other later, and just instantly vanished. Remembering the words of Faye that Amy must answer for her deed, the baby decided not to give up and do everything in her power. The next day, the maid told Amy's mom that it seems that antipyretics do not help anymore. The doctor should be contacted and asked for other medications. The princess approached Faye and asked him if her friend still thought she was doing wrong. The boy replied that it was hard to believe, but she had no more than a day to live. Emmett replied that there were few things in this world that were hard to believe, were there not? Since she remembered her past life, many things had happened to her. The girl had met a nanny who loved her unselfishly. Through a miraculous coincidence, met Faye and Ard. Through good people, she learned to be more open-minded. They made her happy, and the little girl began to smile more often. This all meant that she now loved and was loved. Emmett told Fairy to watch what was about to happen. A simultaneous black and lilac energy immediately began to hover around the babe. The boy dumbfoundedly asked how she did it. Emmett replied that it was only because of him. She had previously thought that purification was a task of divine power, but after listening to him, she looked at it from a different perspective. If purification could be done with magic, then she should have used both powers at the same time. As soon as she stopped restraining her mana, it worked. Before that, the whole time she was just focused on completely the wrong thing. Face asked why she was thanking him. The little girl replied that it was because his words made her wonder. Should Amy have to pay such a price for a misdemeanor? Stealing is certainly a sin, but not one that is punishable by death. Sometimes it was enough to point out a person's mistake. The boy seemed to realize his mistake and said he hoped the little girl would recover as soon as possible. When the maid's voice began to be heard from afar, the boy quickly covered our heroine with his cloak and they became invisible. After they moved to safety, the little girl exhaled that they had managed to go unnoticed. After calming down a bit, our heroine saw that Faye's eyes were full of tears and asked what happened. The boy managed to say only that if he had been able to meet her earlier, then everything would have been completely different. But all of a sudden, the screams of his parents began to echo as they ran to Amy and had to move to another place again. After returning home, Amulet lay in bed for a few days as she wasn't feeling well. Teacher Tedo diagnosed overwork. She had to confess to using purification. Father and Nelvasto had very different reactions to what they heard, like heaven and earth. The saint exclaimed that she was a good girl and that he believed she would succeed, while the father was angry that she had done something so reckless. The men began to argue. Carden shouted that didn't he realize that his daughter could have died. Nelvasto replied that she was just overworked and needed to rest. There was no need to exaggerate and get so worked up. The woman was infuriated by this kindergarten and shouted for both of them to get out of the princess's bedroom immediately, as she needed to rest. 3 days later, the babe had fully recovered and was very happy that everything had ended well. When they were about to leave for home and were walking towards the carriage, our heroine was caught up by Amy, apologized, and handed some kind of pouch. Opening it, Emmett saw glass beads. After purification, the seeds of death disappeared, so the little girl gave her her beads. She added that she had been looking for the seeds of death, but they could not be found. Our heroine thought to herself that it was good that she had not found anything, because there was no need for it. Out loud, she exclaimed that it was such a wonderful gift, and she would definitely treat them with care. The girl noted that the little girl sincerely regretted what she had done, so she never once doubted that she had made the right decision. Then they, together with her father, waved to the aristocrats of Prado Manor and headed back home. Amy mentally said thank you to Amulet over and over again, calling her her guardian angel. After a while, Nelvasto noted that it meant she now had glass beads instead of seeds. The girl was at first startled by the surprise, as the guy had appeared from nowhere and replied that it was a gift. The saint asked her if she remembered that her birthday was coming up. He really hoped that her father would invite him to the celebration. But suddenly the babe said that they would not celebrate, and when asked why, replied that there was nothing special about the days, so why organize anything? The young man exclaimed that this was simply unthinkable, and if he were her, he would insist on a celebratory banquet. Emily objected that she didn't even want to hear about it. She would rather spend the day with her family. She thought to herself that she definitely wouldn't have a big reception for a lot of guests, because after her birthday would come the day of Reina's death. Nelvasto insisted and said that she should try because there were probably a lot of people who wanted to attend her party. But let her do as she saw fit, her uncle would come to congratulate her anyway. A week later, a lot of people came to her party. They were Tedo's teacher, Erwin, Grandpa Medjihorse, and also her uncle. On top of that, her close friends Prince Ard and Mage Faye were there. The young man said he had also invited Teacher Descu, but he wasn't feeling well, so he handed over a letter. Carden then looked the little girl in the eyes and thanked her for what she is. Our heroine began to be congratulated by everyone and given gifts. She felt incredibly happy and told everyone thank you very much. After a while, the Duke came to the portrait on which he and Raina were depicted and said that he would very much like them to celebrate this day together. The little girl thought to herself that she didn't want to feel guilty, but there was simply no other way. Mommy, more than anyone else, would want to be there for them. At least that's what she thought. Out loud, however, she said that this is her best birthday and she really hopes that Mommy is happy. 4 years later, our heroine has grown into a girl and asked Erwin if she looks like her now.